Chapter 1136. The Cullen Expeditionary Force fired another 2 cannonballs. The frontline troops collapsed like a collapsing house, not to mention withstanding them. In the chaos, the only 1,000 soldiers who could fight had to quickly gather near the headquarters to protect Eudora from being hurt by some guys with bad intentions. At this point, any magic tactics are no longer useful. Eudora, who is sitting in the half-underground command center, looks dispirited. She finally accepts her fate. She held her scepter tightly and looked at the dagger she got from her advisor. She looked at it with a complicated expression for a long time. The advisors around them did not cry because of the defeat. Even though they were all women, they had never thought of using their bodies to plead for mercy from the enemy. But it was one thing to think this way. What the enemy would do was not up to them. In history, Tuck women were often sold at high prices in Lockman's slave market. If they were priests, people would fight for them even if they were 5 times more expensive. Just because they were rare, some big nobles would have a different kind of pleasure when they bullied them. If the enemy was Lockman's sorcerer, Eudora and her advisors might have already committed suicide. Because the Tuck people and these sorcerers had been fighting constantly in history, the accumulated hatred had long been indescribable. If they fell into the hands of the enemy, they would definitely not have a good ending. But now, madam, the enemy shot a letter with an arrow. Outside, a heavily armored Tuck soldier knelt at the door. Eudora picked it up and glanced at it. She was inexplicably relieved. It seems that Lockman is not even qualified to intervene in this war. The advisors gathered around to read the letter and found that Sodeler, as the commander of the Kingdom of Karen, ordered Eudora and her army to give up resistance and disarm. He also said that the Kingdom of Karen would be fully responsible for the subsequent redemption of the prisoners of war in Icica. These seemingly inconspicuous words were exactly what Eudora and others wanted, because the army of the Kingdom of Karen really seemed to be here to fight a war, not to vent hatred and solve religious conflicts. In the face of this powerful and strange enemy, their desire to die for their country quickly weakened. In fact, everyone was smart. Who would want to die? Eudora did not want to become the kingdom's cannon fodder. She put away the letter and said in a low voice, "No matter what, we still need to understand what kind of enemy this is. If there's really an irreversible ending, it won't be too late to sacrifice myself for your majesty then." This made the advisors in the room relieved, and the subsequent arrangement was nothing new. As usual, Eudora asked the soldiers to raise the white flag to show their surrender. At 8:00 in the morning, the Kingdom of Karen's expeditionary force ended the battle without shedding a single drop of blood. There were originally more than 15,000 enemies, but due to the large-scale retreat within an hour, there were only about 9,000 left. The rest had already fled into the distance. If Eudora hadn't raised the white flag early, more people would have escaped. When the infantry division took over the captives, they found that they had only fired 3 cannons, but the enemy had suffered nearly 1,000 casualties. Part of it was due to the stampede during the retreat, and the other part was due to some of the soldiers who attacked the headquarters and were killed and dispersed. Eudora and others were tense, waiting for the judgment of this strange army. However, everything that the army of the Kingdom of Karen had done since they took over here made these Tuck tribesmen realize that something was different. The cold Vulcan cannon stopped 200 meters away, and the huge barrel pointed at Eudora's position. This deterrence made the high-ranking priests around sweaty. They completely lost their former dignified image. Some of them even didn't dare to wipe their sweat. After the entire infantry division stopped, Division Commander Sterry and the guards came forward and contacted Eudora with a serious expression. Scepter Priest Eudora didn't know what to say. She stood there with a pale face, looking away from the solemn expeditionary force. Finally, she raised her hand in silence and motioned the advisor beside her to hand over the surrender letter that had been written temporarily. Thinking of yesterday when the other side persuaded her to surrender, she still thought of a protracted war. Eudora felt that her decision was more like a joke. The surrender letter of the Kingdom of Karen was obviously not for negotiation, but to numb her. Looking at this posture, the other side had long been ready to cross the river to fight. In the face of such an enemy, she could only say that she lost sincerely. Sterry wasn't arrogant or haughty. Before he came over, he had already contacted Sodeler, who was far away in Lasya City. After receiving the letter of surrender with Eudora's seal, he said, "I accept your surrender on behalf of the expeditionary army of the Kalon Kingdom. Your Excellency Eudora, please cooperate with our action. Abandon all weapons and armors. In the next few days, we will send everyone back to Rassia City in batches." Of course, Sodeler had his own plan to deal with the prisoners of war. Ordinary soldiers could be incorporated into the army, and the outstanding ones would be selected to join the least important logistics transport team as coolies. As for those small nobles or generals from various countries, they would be used as bargaining chips in exchange for a batch of ransom. In this era, a large part of the war wealth was realized through ransom. However, compared with Roddy's arms trade, these things were nothing. Eudora had no room to refuse now. She could only sigh and whisper, "I will cooperate." "Your Excellency Eudora, please get ready. Commander Sodeler wants to talk to you at noon, so you will be arranged to return to Rassia City soon. However, as a prisoner of war, it is forbidden to carry any weapons or items related to magic. Next, our people will carry out an inspection. I hope you can cooperate." Okay. Up to now, Eudora could feel that the other party had given her enough respect. If it was Wizard Varad, she would have been dragged to the street as a trophy, or tied up and sent to the bed of a member of parliament. This kind of thing had happened before. In fact, she had already prepared for a life-and-death struggle. After all, there were still 15 priests of the Tuk tribe left. If they transformed at the same time, the power would definitely not be underestimated. And this is our prisoner of war regulation. After Sterry gave her a roll of bound paper, he did not explain more and turned to leave. The troops behind quickly began to place the prisoners of war in separate areas to prevent them from collaborating with each other and rebelling. When he saw the trenches on the position, Sterry frowned. He raised his hand and asked the attendant with a walkie-talkie to come over and start reporting to Sodeler. Mobile version of the fastest update website, M. Chapter 1137. Standing there, Eudora was a little confused. She did not understand why the other side gave her this prisoner of war ordinance. However, the scepter priest had nothing to do now, so she opened it and read it. It was written in the language of Lasman. There were several basic regulations on the treatment of prisoners of war by the Kingdom of Karen. The first thing that came into her eyes was, "Do not intentionally hurt prisoners of war." After that, it was stipulated that prisoners of war should be treated humanely, including treating the wounded, giving them enough food and living conditions, etc. In other words, this prisoner of war ordinance gave Eudora a vague understanding of the Kingdom of Karen. The Kingdom of Karen really treated war as a job. During the war, everyone was fighting for their own master. It was normal to kill each other. But after the war, the Kingdom of Karen would continue to treat the prisoner as a human being. Of course, Eudora understood the effect of this ordinance when it was implemented. But it did give her a strong feeling that compared with the Kingdom of Karen, Lasman had a large group of powerful mages. But in terms of civilization, it was much more barbaric. Eudora did not realize the impact of this thinking. She only knew that as soon as she finished reading, a soldier came to tell her to get on the carriage. Carriage? Carriage? Aren't we going to get on the ship? Eudora stood up and was searched. Her necklace, ring, and even a decorative gem on her underwear were taken off. Even the priest robe she was wearing was asked to be changed to the ordinary gray robe worn by the advisors. Eudora could understand the cautiousness of the soldiers. At this time, Eudora did not have much resistance. The soldiers of the kingdom of Karen did not act rudely or take advantage of her. But to ensure her safety, she was put on a set of flashing elemental restraints. After her hands and neck were tied, Eudora did not feel much discomfort as long as she did not struggle. "Follow us." Four seemingly harmless Teflon soldiers took her out of the barrack. After coming out of the headquarters, they walked more than 200 meters and entered the camp of the Karen Expeditionary Force. Here, Eudora finally saw the huge Vulcan cannon up close. Standing in front of this horrible weapon, she looks up at the huge barrel and almost falls to the ground because she steps on a stone. The soldier next to her helps her up and then asks Eudora to go to the back of the truck in front of her. The scepter priestess stepped on the ladder and sat on the hard seat. The start of the truck made her fall. Fortunately, there were soldiers on both sides, so she did not fall off the truck shamefully. Amidst the creaking noises, the truck that was originally used to transport supplies moved quickly on the plain and soon arrived at the Ramu River Bridge 5 kilometers away. When Eudora saw the tower that was more than 20 meters high and the suspension bridge with complicated lines, she was stunned. She opened her mouth wide and looked up, unable to say a word. On both sides of the road were huge signs with the words, "Stop for inspection," written on them. When the truck slowly stopped, some soldiers in different clothes quickly got on the truck to verify Eudora's identity. There were also 2 mages using magic to confirm whether she used the camouflage spell. After passing the test, Eudora watched the 2 mages release the levitation spell on the truck. Then the huge truck easily drove along the wooden planks of the suspension bridge. It took less than a minute to drive from one side of the bridge to the other side. The truck continued to drive along the well-trodden path towards Rashai City. This bridge. Eudora did not know what to say. She involuntarily wanted to stand up and continue to observe the exaggerated suspension bridge. As a result, this movement made the 4 soldiers next to her immediately raise the crystal guns in their hands. "Sit down, don't move." Eudora did not know how their weapons attacked, but she instinctively felt a strong threat when she was pointed at by the gun barrel. She quickly sat back down. Usually, this scepter priest looked sophisticated. At this time, she really could not calm down. If the kingdom of Karen could build a bridge whenever it wanted, then all the natural strongholds, from here to Isika, would completely lose their strategic significance. She went through the map from here to Isika in her mind. Her body could not help but tremble. Without the advantage of anti-magic Terra, with the current tactical system and combat level of Isika, she had no idea how to stop the enemy, unless, after thinking of a possibility, Eudora shivered and asked, "How did you do it? I mean, how long did it take to build it? Why didn't I know there was such a bridge from the beginning to the end?" But Eudora's question was destined to get no answer. The 4 Teflon soldiers were silent like sculptures. Eudora knew that it was meaningless even if she transformed and fought now. The curiosity in her heart had surpassed everything. Now she just wanted to know what kind of existence this kingdom of Karen was. After crossing the river and arriving at the gate of Russia, it took less than a quarter of an hour to travel 5 kilometers. Eudora was so shocked by the amazing speed that she became more and more silent. As a commander, she could not imagine how terrible the logistical advantage of the army with such a means of transportation was. Not only the terrible difference of transportation speed, but also the use of manpower, food consumption and so on for long-distance combat were more troublesome problems for the commander. Take the attack action of 40,000 people as an example. Transporting a ton of grain from the grain production area to the location of the ferry, the people in the transportation team could even eat the same weight of grain on the way. Because of this inefficient logistics, the area and route she chose for the decisive battle were greatly affected. With this kind of truck as a logistical means of transportation, for Eudora, she could simply fight wherever she wanted on the map, and she could always take the initiative. She thought about this with her eyes fixed. When her buttocks were completely numb, the truck finally stopped. Turning her head, the gate of Rasha was close at hand. Eudora had imagined the scene of entering the city countless times, but she never thought that she would stand here as a captive. She was helped out of the car. As soon as she stood firm, she saw another truck next to her, loaded with a whole truck of food, driving away into the distance with the sound of the tires crunching over the gravel road, raising a cloud of dust. After several improvements by the research department, most parts of the truck body at this time were replaced with more wear-resistant metal parts. The entire container was welded with pure metal plate. At a glance, Eudora knew that there were at least 7 or 8 tons of grain piled on it. How many camels could carry this amount of grain? Mobile version of the fastest website, M. Chapter 1138. Swallowing her saliva, Eudora stretched her neck, and then found that she was handed over to another team. 4 Teflings and the city guards in exquisite leather armor in front of her saluted. After a series of tasks were handed over, the guards confirmed that Eudora's identity was correct and turned around to leave. And Eudora was sent to a carriage under the leadership of the Imperial Guards in the city. This time, the carriage, guarded by more than 10 soldiers, went straight into the inner city. The carriage was enclosed. The people around obviously didn't know Eudora's identity, so they didn't yell at her. Eudora realized that up until now, she had never seen any Lockman wizard come into contact with her. She had only seen a few soldiers dressed up as Lockman at the city gate, but they were obviously just on the sidelines. They stood far away and did not even talk to her. Previously, she regarded the kingdom of Karen as a mercenary, the kind of people who did things for money. After all, there were many similar military groups in this land. However, compared with the strength shown by the kingdom of Karen, those military groups were just like gangsters on the street. Judging from the fact that they directly controlled the inner city of Raxia and even directly transported supplies, did Lastman hand over the whole city to them? If so, there was no need for Essica to fight them to the end. They didn't have such deep hatred. What if they could negotiate some conditions to reach a truce? Eudora didn't realize that she had unconsciously leaned toward negotiation because she had experienced the despair of facing artillery fire. Although she was unwilling, she was more afraid. Direct confrontation had been the first choice. The sound outside the carriage was getting quieter and quieter, which meant that they had entered the core of the inner city. However, when the carriage stopped, Eudora, who was escorted by the soldiers, didn't see Sodeler or Roddy directly. Instead, she entered the tower, walked down the spiral stairs, and was taken to a cold cell. There was no warden here, because the prison itself was temporary. The person in charge of the prison was one of Sodeler's aides. Lord Sodeler will talk to you in 2 hours. Now you wait here. The most elite soldiers and weapons of the kingdom of Karen are here. I think you know what to do and what not to do. The element shackles are unlocked. Eudora rubs her sore neck and forearm. She doesn't seem to believe that the enemy is so lenient with her. Lord Sodeler said that he didn't shackle you so that the conversation between us would be more dignified. I hope you can understand this well. Don't take it as a reason to be arrogant. If anything happens, I promise you that you will regret being born into this world. The seemingly weak wooden door is opened. Eudora ignores the man's threatening words and steps in. To be honest, these words were very polite. Eudora glanced at the front and found that this cell was not as shabby as she had imagined. Except that there were no windows and it was abnormally cold, it was clean and had no smell. At the same time, Casley. When she saw another figure sitting in the room, Eudora was shocked. Priest Eudora. The corners of Casley's mouth twitched, but there was not much of a smile on her face. Casley's first reaction at that time was to commit suicide and die for the country. However, she was stopped by Erwin the Bull. After being captured, she faced Roddy's personal interrogation. At that time, this strong female general was also prepared to face all kinds of torture. From beginning to end, she didn't reveal any information about the army of Iskar. Based on this performance, it was absolutely right to say that she was a loyal and patriotic general. However, at this time, when Kasley saw her absolute boss Eudora, she didn't even stand up, let alone salute. She just sat on the wooden chair, and it seemed that she was not surprised by the result of Eudora's defeat and capture. Eudora was shocked by the various means shown by the kingdom of Karen many times along the way. Now she finally met an acquaintance, but she found that the other party was very cold. She was very confused. She hesitated and asked, "They didn't do anything to you, right?" "No, I just wore the shackles for a few days." Kasley shook her head and raised her hand to pour a glass of water with the kettle. "There is food and drink here. The conditions are good. I can also go out for an hour at noon every day. I feel that I have gained a lot of weight." Eudora was stunned. Was this the attitude of treating war criminals? The only thing she knew about captives was that they would torture them and throw them to the construction site or the battlefield after asking enough questions. They would do heavy physical work all day long and die of exhaustion. "So what did you say to them?" "No, I didn't say anything. They didn't ask me later." Kasley picked up the glass and took a sip. She pointed to the side. "Priest, sit down and talk." Eudora really couldn't figure out why she became this attitude. Even if both sides became prisoners of war, Kasley should be her subordinate. This kind of casual attitude made her very uncomfortable. However, Eudora could still calm down. She didn't talk nonsense and sat directly next to her. She drank water and kept silent. She was waiting for Kasley to take the initiative to speak. "Priest Eudora, I have a question that I have always wanted to ask." Kasley was a straightforward person. She was too lazy to hide anything. She asked, "Will you suddenly turn into a monster and tear me apart?" The room was quiet for a few seconds. Eudora looked away unnaturally. "It turns out that you are here because of this. I have read the doctrine. I have to go to the Divine Hall to participate in activities on every festival since I was a child. My ability was also taught by the head guard of the Divine Hall. But for more than 20 years, I have never heard of a holy priest turning into a monster." Kasley looked cold and said in a deep voice, "His Majesty said that this war must be fought. Priest Eudora, you gave the order, then I will carry out the order and fight. If I can't win, if I lose, even if you want to kill me, I'll accept it. But those priests turned into monsters in order to keep some secret." She stared straight at Eudora. "Please tell me, is this also the order of His Majesty?" As a soldier, she naturally obeyed the military order unconditionally. But it should be known that the Thuk clan had been a religious country from hundreds of years ago to the present. The belief in religion was destined from birth. Because of this, when the priest who originally represented the holy suddenly turned into the ferocious monster, Kasley almost had her outlook on life subverted. Eudora didn't know how to answer for a while. The room was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. In fact, when she entered the room and met Kasley, Eudora suspected that Kasley had been instigated. But after hearing her question, Eudora confirmed that Kasley was still the same Kasley. Kasley was so disappointed and even turned against her because the faith she had been insisting on for a long time completely collapsed at the moment when the priest turned into a monster. After all, she was not a clergyman and knew nothing about the real inside story. In this situation, Kasley would only feel angry for being deceived. These things are hard to explain. The fastest website for mobile version, M. Chapter 1139. Eudora sighed. But before she continued to speak, Kasley said, "Those things, I mean, those weird and disgusting things, they have nothing to do with the gods we have always believed in, right?" The scepter priest opened her mouth for a long time and said in a hoarse voice, "This problem is very complicated." "Complicated? Damn it. Don't you even know how to lie?" Casley suddenly broke the armrest with a slap, stood up and roared, "Are you going to tell me that Thuk clan has been dedicating everything to such disgusting monsters for so many years? We have suffered so much in the desert, so many people have died, and so many sacrifices have been made. Are we slaves to such guys?" Her roar made Eudora's ears hurt. But as a scepter priest, she could only refute, "It's not what you think, it's not what I'm thinking." Casley grabbed Eudora's collar and lifted her up from the seat. The strong female general's muscles bulged. At this time, she was like an angry leopard. "Do you know what you are doing? As a priest and those high priests behind you, don't you know that you are blaspheming?" For believers, the word blasphemy was a very serious crime. To put it bluntly, even if believers killed blasphemers in the street, no one would blame them. In this era, the gods of religious countries were sacred and inviolable. Any believer had the obligation to stop the blasphemy. Eudora was held like this, but she did not dare to push Casley with her hands. She lowered her voice. "You don't listen to my explanation. Are you going to hit a scepter priest directly?" Casley stared at her with a ferocious expression and finally let go of her hand. "Explain. I hope you can tell some truth." Eudora raised her eyebrows. "What do you mean? Did someone say something to you?" Casley did not say anything. She just sat on the chair next to her and drank water. Eudora organized her words and said, "His Majesty did find some unusual things in these years, some powers that can be seized for his own use. You should know that if we don't have enough trump cards, we can't just rely on our divine spells and armies to take back the Thuk clan's land. So, you accepted the bewitchment of those things and became their sacrifices. Now, you're using this power to control people's hearts and counterattack Lasman, right?" Casley's voice was a little tired. In the end, she muttered, "Sure enough, they were right. Who said that? What did you hear?" Eudora immediately looks around vigilantly, but Casley shakes her head and says, "These people from the kingdom of Karen said it. They came to me with the remains of the priests a few days ago. I didn't say anything, but they said these things again. When they left, Eudora's expression changed dramatically, and she immediately asked, "What do you mean? Have these people from the kingdom of Karen met him before?" As soon as she finished speaking, she realized what she had exposed. Casley's expression became colder and colder. Her words seemed to be squeezed out from the gaps between her teeth. "Demons from another plane, demons! Are you making a deal with these things? Or do you think you can control such creatures?" Being pressed to this point, Eudora has nothing to say. She originally wanted to negotiate with these people from the kingdom of Karen by various means, but she never thought that all her illusions were destroyed by her former subordinates in this prison cell. In fact, all the priests in Icika realized that something was wrong when they came into contact with such a spell. However, as time went by and His Majesty persuaded them, Eudora and others gradually reached a consensus. No matter what the other party was, as long as this power could be controlled by them, it didn't matter where it came from. After all, according to His Majesty's words and various signs, if they didn't learn these things in time, the entire Icika would be shrouded in the coming disaster. In other words, they had no choice. "Casley, we actually have no choice. Your choice is to let the priests become monsters, let the soldiers of other countries become monsters, let these cannon fodder tear up Lasman's country, and then make room for those demons?" Casley seemed to have aged a lot. She slumped on the chair. "It's too stupid, too stupid. But what else can we do except this?" Eudora gritted her teeth and retorted, "You are just a general with a brain full of muscles. Do you know what Icika is facing? If it is not a disaster, why do we bother to use this kind of magic? Do you think those priests will risk their lives to fight just to work for those guys? Whether the sword is used to kill the enemy or ourselves, it all depends on how we control it. Oh, you have 10,000 reasons to do these things, but what about now?" Casley's face was full of sarcasm. "Haven't you realized one thing? These people from the kingdom of Karen are not just here to deal with you. How long do you think Isika can resist with their weapons and fighting methods? This sentence was equivalent to ending all the previous arguments, because the hard facts were in front of her, and Eudora, the scepter priest, could not refute. The room fell into silence, and Casley no longer questioned anything. She just sat there in a daze. Obviously, she was used to this kind of life. Eudora's face was uncertain. Now her heart had been inexplicably shaken, or it could be said that before this, she did not firmly believe in His Majesty, but Casley's performance deepened her doubts. After a long time, footsteps came from outside the door, and the simple wooden door was opened. A person who looked like a servant came in and gave them wet towels to wipe their faces. What do you mean? You need to wipe your face before the meeting? Eudora immediately thought of a bad ending. She found that General Casley, whose shoulders were half as wide as hers, was also asked to wipe her face clean. At the same time, there was a special maid to comb her messy hair. You need to pay attention to your image when you are going to be in the newspaper. This sentence made both of them confused, but soon they were taken to the reception room on the top of the tower. Eudora thought she would face a trial, but the expected serious scene of being pointed at by a sword did not appear. She and Casley were arranged to sit on one side of the long table. Within 2 minutes, Sodeler, dressed in casual clothes, came down alone. He did not have a solemn sense of ceremony at all. He walked to the long table and sat down, and then the servant poured water in front of the three of them. I'm Sodeler, the commander of the Kingdom of Karen Expeditionary Force. Because time is tight, I'll make it short. He picked up the cup and took a sip. General Casley has been here for a while. I didn't interrogate you. And Priest Eudora, I also know about your identity and status. The war is over and your army has surrendered. As for the treatment of prisoners of war and ransom, I have nothing to discuss with you. These words made the two of them purse their lip. They felt that they seemed to be of no other use. Let you sit here, I only have one question for you to answer. He leaned forward and looked at the two of them with sharp eyes. I need you to tell me the battle plan of Isika's army, as well as the current deployment location of your troops and granaries. Neither of them spoke. Such a question was expected. They could imagine, if they were stubborn now, there might be torture to make them confess later. But Sodeler's next words stunned Eudora. I know you are hesitating, but now you have to think about one thing. We are not here to kill you, we are here to save you. Casley swallowed. She did not speak because she was extremely disappointed after the collapse of her faith. She was no longer as firm as she used to be. Eudora's body was tense. After a moment of silence, she finally asked, Why do you say that? Because you are in big trouble. Do you really think that your little power can arm wrestle with the Lord of the demonic plane? Sodeler was not condescending or aggressive. Instead, he stared at her and said quickly, Does your Majesty think that she has an adventure and that no one else in the world knows the existence of demons? Does she think that controlling the power of demons can help her get everything? I can only say that you have really become frogs at the bottom of a well after staying in a corner of the desert for too long. These words made Eudora's breath quicken, but she could not refute. The army of the Kingdom of Karen is not used to deal with small characters like you. Can you understand what I am saying? Whether it is the artillery, the technology of building bridges, or the trucks for transporting supplies, from the beginning, they are not used to deal with Isika or the surrounding small countries whose names I can't even remember. You don't deserve it at all. Sodeler's tone was calm. If we want, a whole army can parachute into your capital tonight and burn down your homes. But the reason why we did not do so is that the Kingdom of Karen is fulfilling the agreement signed with Lesamon. According to the agreement, we need to drive you out of the territory that we have occupied. But now I call you here to talk, not to fight, but to let you know a fact. Ending the dispute between you and Lesamon is just something we want to do. The real goal is the damn demons behind you. I hope you can understand the stakes, and then give me a conclusion." He leaned back in his chair. "Perhaps you don't know this, but the Cullen Kingdom is the only kingdom in the entire continent that has established a friendly relationship with all the dragon race. We have been working tirelessly to deal with the invaders from the foreign plains. But you guys are great. Not only are you not busy, you even became the evil demon's outpost." Sodeler shook his head and no longer spoke. And Eudora's forehead was covered with cold sweat. End of this chapter. Chapter 1140. Eudora had imagined countless ways to face the enemy, but the one in front of her was the most difficult for her to accept. The enemy didn't think about how to torture her or how to interrogate her, because he didn't take the army of Iceka seriously at all. He even directly said that they didn't deserve to be the enemy of the kingdom of Karen. The pride that she had maintained for a long time was completely disintegrated. Eudora's confidence was shattered by Sodeler's words. She looked at the ground with a pale face and didn't know how to answer for a while. Of course, she didn't realize that from the moment she walked into Rasia City, the psychological war had already begun. Was it a coincidence that Casley said those words in prison? Obviously, from the moment Rasia City was breached, a series of plans against Eudora began to work. Deliberately dissecting the priest who became a demon in the next room where Casley was imprisoned, and saying those words and these hints were to let them understand the current situation from the root. After Casley changed her position unconsciously, he deliberately showed the bridge, army, weapons and trucks in front of Eudora, crushing her thoughts of resistance with absolute strength. This was not a conspiracy, but an open conspiracy. Instigating the enemy didn't require violence. Because through the torture of other prisoners of war, Sodeler found that most of the Tuk tribesmen in Iceka didn't know what a demon was. This country practiced autocracy, and there was a typical separation between the upper and lower levels. The people at the bottom believed in the priests devoutly, but they didn't know that they had become the tools of the demons. Under such a premise, Sodeler's primary goal was to let them realize the problem of the upper level of Iceka, so that they could put down their opposing positions. If there was a middle-level priest who was willing to change sides, it would not be as simple as saving a little bit of military expenses for the whole war. Eudora began to tremble slightly under the heavy pressure. She said a word, but then she found that she didn't know how to express it. She was already in a mess, so she turned to look at Casley helplessly. As a result, the latter raised her head very clearly and said, "If your country can guarantee that the purpose is not to slaughter the Tuk tribesmen, then I am willing to provide you with all the information I know, but I have an additional condition." "Say it." "I hope that you can tell those tribesmen the truth of the matter. No one wanted to commit treason, but if it was to save the people, it was a completely different story." That was what Sodeler was waiting for. The Kingdom of Karen's only goal is to take back the territory that Iceka has occupied. In other words, if you can convince them to retreat, we won't even need to move a single soldier. After all, I want to save military expenses, don't I? But everyone knew that was impossible. Casley's expression changed. "I can only write a letter to explain to those generals. As for whether they believe me or not, that's another matter." Seeing her sincerity, Sodeler nodded. "I can sign a magic contract with you. If possible, you won't become a prisoner of war. Instead, you can be a private after passing the examination. However, I will invite you to become a member of my staff. After all, in this place, the information you provide can minimize casualties on both sides, right?" A magic contract? Casley did not expect that she, a prisoner, could receive such equal treatment. In the sequence of Iceka, the word general sounded intimidating. In fact, when they saw a clergyman, they had to salute respectfully. Basically, they had no political status. They were only valued when there was a war. When there was no war, no one cared about them at all. Sodeler did not waste any time. With a wave of his hand, he had someone bring the prepared contract. He added what Casley said on it and showed it to her directly. If you agree, then sign the contract. Of course, it did not mean that she would be free after signing the contract. Instead, she was required to serve the army of the Kingdom of Karen for 10 years. After 10 years, she could obtain the nationality and corresponding status of the Kingdom of Karen. But except for this military operation, she could never return to Icica again. Casley was a little hesitant. After all, not everyone could completely cut ties with their hometown. If we move fast enough, we can solve the problem before the demons harm Icica. Do you understand what I mean? Sodeler's tone was cold. When Casley heard this, she could not help but shiver. Then, she immediately picked up a pen and signed it. Then, she pressed her hand on the magic circle and completed the contract signing. Eudora looked at this scene, and the pressure in her heart increased. The first to surrender often received better treatment. She swallowed, but still struggled a little. What you said, from the beginning to the end, you have not shown any evidence. I already know that your weapons are advanced, but your understanding of the demons, is it really as thorough as you said? Sodeler did not talk nonsense. He raised his hand and pointed upstairs. Take her upstairs. The Prime Minister will tell her about the demons. After that, he got up and said to Casley, Private Casley, follow me outside. The reporters need to take pictures. Casley did not understand what he meant at all, but she still followed him out. After coming to the position in the inner city courtyard that was originally used by the commanding officer to speak, Sodeler stood beside him and straightened his uniform. The reporter with the strange magic circle greeted him. General Sodeler, I need you to cooperate a little. Speak. Face to face and then shake hands. And this, Private Casley. Well, this private needs to take a picture alone. When Casley began to pose helplessly, Eudora had already come to the room on the upper floor of the tower. The wooden door was pushed open. Roddy, who was studying the map at the desk, turned his head and looked over. Sit down and talk. He was wearing a loose linen robe. As he walked over, he waved to the guards at the door. Let them in. As soon as he said that, a few thin Teflon soldiers came in. Before Eudora could react what was going on, they began to transform in an instant. They became huge and ferocious demons. Because it was indoors, their transformed bodies brought Eudora an indescribable sense of oppression. Because Teflon was a real demon hybrid, it was completely different from the priests who were forced to transform after being infected by the demonic breath. The extremely aggressive breath made her whole body tense, and she could not help but swallow several times. Okay, that's enough. With the words of Roddy, the Teflon soldiers immediately returned to their original appearance. Then they saluted and retreated. Eudora's eyes widened because she thought that these people would die on the spot, but she didn't expect them to turn around and leave as if nothing had happened. Roddy did not explain anything about demons, but the scene in front of her could already prove the Kingdom of Karen's research level on demons. So Eudora no longer hesitated. She immediately got up, thought about it, and knelt on one knee. She bowed her head and said, I am willing to sign a contract to provide all the information I know to the Kingdom of Karen. Mobile version of the fastest website, M. Chapter 1141. A day later, the Lockman Parliament conducted a drill. As early as when the expeditionary force had just arrived at Rasha City, the Parliament had conducted a series of votes and decisions. At that time, Speaker Jeremy and the Parliament members voted together and approved the manufacturing plan of the new war puppet, and showed the design drawings and preliminary ideas to everyone in the Parliament Hall. As the Deputy Dean of the Moffat Academy, Kronos remembered that he was particularly excited on that day. Because of the anti-magic area, the Moffat Academy, which had been doing odd jobs for a long time, quickly became the hope in the eyes of the people. The enemy was not afraid of magic, but they could not ignore the physical damage from long-range weapons. Therefore, the artillery crossbow, powered by magic crystal, and the shotgun, powered by the new crystal energy, immediately became one of the two most popular weapons. The new war puppet, that everyone had placed their hopes on, should actually be called a huge land battleship. According to the blueprint, the war machine was 30 meters long, 17 meters wide, and 10 meters tall. It was driven by 60 huge wooden tires, and its unique suspension system allowed it to ignore most terrains. Whether it was a desert or a wasteland, it could travel as if it was on flat ground. Above it was like a battleship, equipped with 16 rotating short-range artillery crossbows and 20 ultra-long-range crystal cannons. It was expected that it would also be combined with various large-scale arrays to provide all kinds of fire support and protection for nearby allies. This was especially important for the originally weak Lockman infantry. Originally, Lockman did not have crystal cannons, but since Roddy brought the extremely efficient crystal energy, the Moffat Academy had secretly developed this powerful weapon. Naturally, the huge war puppet could not be completed now, but with a group of puppeteers working day and night, the combat platform, part of the machine, had been preliminarily built, and it was equipped with enough cannons and artillery crossbows, which appeared in an open space outside the city. This was naturally to boost the confidence of the Parliament members, to let them realize that Lockman had now found a way to deal with the enemy. As the orders were passed down, the sound of the 16 ballistae firing simultaneously under the control of the soldiers and the deafening roar of the 20 crystal cannons shocked the councillors who hadn't experienced war for a long time. The targets 100 meters away were pierced through by the ballistae, and the wooden targets 400 to 800 meters away were smashed into pieces by the solid round cannonballs. The councillors were all amazed. Most of them were comparing the power of the weapons and the magic with smiles on their faces. Some of the councillors who did not look happy were mocking them. They were obviously the stubborn old men who believed that puppets could not replace sorcerers in war. Such a conversation was not uncommon. Jeremy did not pay attention to the argument between them. As the chairman, he had seen the recent efforts of Moffat Academy. Listening to the rumbling gunfire and flying debris, the chairman felt that the suffocating feeling in his chest seemed to have eased up a lot, but he soon realized that Councillor Kronos's expression was very ugly. "Is there a problem, Kronos?" "Mr. President," Kronos wanted to say something but stopped. Finally, he shook his head. "It's still a lot worse." Jeremy knew what he was talking about. He frowned. "Are these weapons not enough to deal with the army of the Tuk clan? Pulling them directly to the front line is definitely more effective than the sorcerers who are silent now. But compared to the army of the Kingdom of Karen," he sighed deeply. His face was indescribably dispirited. "We seem to have fallen behind an entire era." The councillors who were discussing the power of the cannons heard their conversation. They gradually stopped their topic and gathered around. "Councillor Kronos, if there are hundreds of such cannons, I'm afraid the enemy will be blown up before they can even get close to our troops. They can be blown up from 600 to 700 meters away. This is already beyond the attack range of ordinary sorcerers. But there is no accuracy at all. Look at those targets. What's the probability of hitting them?" The councillors were still arguing, but Kronos was not in the mood to listen. He shook his head. "Mr. President, the power of the cannons of the Kingdom of Karen may be similar to these at close range, but their firing speed is 10 times faster." The voices around quieted down. "What about the firing range?" "The crystal cannons called Marmot have a firing range of 1 kilometer. The one called Vulcan has a firing range of 2 kilometers. Of course, I didn't see it with my own eyes. But the power is real. If we have at least 10 cannons, we might only have the power of 1 cannonball of the Vulcan." The scene of a group of sorcerers discussing firearms was a bit funny. But when Kronos said this, The counselors who were originally excited did not know what to say. At this time, a report came in. The scepter priest Eudora surrendered? Jeremy could not believe what he was hearing. In the war with Lassiman, the Tuk tribesmen rarely accepted surrender. No matter who lost, they would not stop until one side was dead. He could accept the result of Roddy's victory, but he could not believe that the enemy would surrender. He thought for a moment and asked, "Will the priest be escorted back to the rear?" "Mr. President," Commander Sodeler means, not only did the priest surrender, but he has also become a member of the army of the Kingdom of Karen. He does not intend to hand him over to us." "What? How could he accept this group of evil priests?" They could understand if Eudora was imprisoned. But how could the counselors be willing to let her become an ally without any harm? But Counselor Jeremy had no choice. In the face of the dispute, he directly used a new proposal and voting method. He quickly passed two urgent decisions. First, extend the research period of the new war puppet. Suspend the research of cannons and focus on completing the supporting structure. Second, buy 4 marmot cannons and 400 cannonballs for imitation and research. The counselors who ended the meeting were dejected. Kronos did not say a word. Jeremy patted his shoulder and said, "When the cannons are bought, our research will definitely speed up." "But Mr. President, what I am most worried about is not the cannons, but their ability to fly soldiers from another continent. No one pointed this out before because all the counselors knew it was unsolvable. Then we should be glad that the Kingdom of Karen is on our side, right?" Speaker Jeremy sighed after he finished speaking. He raised his head and looked towards the south. He really could not understand why Rhodey brought this army to another continent. Was it really just to repel the Tuk tribe? Obviously, he would not know that Roddy was flying above the Sargasso desert at this time. His eyes were staring at the yellow sand with ripples, looking for the trace of Havala City. Writing Chinese website. Chapter 1142. The Shadow Dragon was flying at a high altitude. Roddy was not the only one in the cabin on both sides. Merlin Sarah, Natha, and the priest Eudora, who had just surrendered, were also in the cabin on both sides. Eudora had never flown on a dragon, let alone experienced a closed cabin. At this time, she and Natha were sitting in the cabin on the right side. They stretched their necks and stared at the endless yellow sand below. They were so nervous that their palms were sweaty. "Nah, Ms. Natha, do you have a very friendly relationship with the dragons?" Eudora's current identity was Roddy's advisor, but she was obviously not used to this identity. After all, except for the confrontation on the battlefield, she knew almost nothing about the Kingdom of Karen. Natha did not like to talk. She was asked by Eudora all along the way. It was not good for her not to answer, but her answer was often very short, "Yes." Then, Eudora screamed before she could say anything because the shadow dragon suddenly rolled to the right and then suddenly began to descend. She almost thought that she was going to be thrown out. She was so scared that she grabbed the handle next to the seat, and her face was pale. This situation was very unexpected. Although Natha sat steadily because of the seatbelt, she was confused because she had never encountered such a situation before. At this time, Natha wanted to ask Roddy why this happened, but because the two cabins were separated, she and Eudora could only wait patiently. Fortunately, after hovering like this for a while, the shadow dragon finally began to descend. After a dozen consecutive bumps and shocks, the dragon landed steadily. Natha glanced at the pale priest behind her, raised her hand and pushed the cabin door open. "Come down." Eudora's legs were shaking badly, but she still gritted her teeth and stood up, keeping up with the others' pace. The dazzling sun was scorching the earth. Standing on the back of the dragon, Eudora looked around and saw endless sand dunes. There was almost no reference. She had long been used to such a world because the location of Icica was in the depths of such a desert. Through a few raised hills in the distance, she could roughly judge that they were now more than 500 kilometers away from Rasia City. It took the dragon only 1.5 hours to arrive here. Such a speed really amazed Eudora. But at this time she was more curious about why Roddy wanted to come to such a remote place. There was no oasis or buildings around, only some unique desert plants could occasionally be seen in the depressions of the dunes. There were sand lizards crawling under their feet. Roddy jumped down lightly in front of them and said, "We can't fly into that area. We need to walk. Let's go." Then, Merlin Sarah gently descended from the seat. The elementalist gently patted the shadow dragon beside her as if she was communicating with it. Eudora looked up at the area in front of her, but she didn't notice anything strange at all. But Roddy had stepped forward, so she and Natha had to step forward to keep up. The baby shadow dragon seemed to be unwilling to fly here. Merlin Sarah said, "It should not be something like a no-fly enchantment. I didn't feel any fluctuation, and it didn't show any fear." Roddy nodded and walked into this area with a suspicious face. At the same time, he looked at the new mission prompt that appeared, "Save the Thuk tribe." The first step was to capture a living priest for questioning. Roddy directly captured a scepter priest. Naturally, he had completed the task perfectly. He also received an excessive amount of mission experience as a reward. But the grasp of Turin staff in the mission reward would not appear out of thin air, but the coordinates of the reward location were marked on the map. His main goal for coming here today was to find the traces of Havala City, and his second goal was to collect the mission reward. Originally, he was flying towards the coordinates, but when the baby shadow dragon got close, it suddenly rolled away. It was unwilling to land directly, so he could only land in the distance and walk to the coordinate. The baby shadow dragon had no problem following him on the ground. After walking for a short distance, Roddy found that his most important mission actually had a new prompt. Origin of artifact, you have arrived near the Marhala Temple. Try to find the entrance to Havala City. This prompt clearly told Roddy that he had found Havala City. In other words, he originally thought that he would need to spend a lot of effort to find this legendary city in the vast desert, but now with this prompt, Roddy found that he found it effortlessly and actually landed on the edge of the city. "Roddy, what do we do next?" Merlin Sarah looked around and didn't notice anything strange. "Look for the ruins of Havala City, but we better be careful. There's definitely something wrong with this place," he said as he looked down at the ground. But no matter how he sensed, there didn't seem to be any energy reaction here. Beside him, Natha had already searched around a 30-meter radius, but there was only sand and the wood elves found nothing. Eudora was confused, but at the same time, she felt that Roddy wouldn't joke about such things. She wanted to say something, but she was too embarrassed to do so. After all, she did not have any constructive suggestions. However, she did not wait for long before she saw Roddy suddenly raise his hand and move his fingers in the air. After that, he walked in a certain direction. After stopping according to the coordinates on the map, Roddy was already standing at the bottom of the sand dune. He suddenly condensed a magic tentacle behind him, and then quickly dug the sand. Merlin Sarah didn't ask anything and came over to help with the digging with magic. The two busied themselves for more than an hour and dug a huge pit of nearly 15 meters under the sand dune. The two were sweating and panting, but in the end, they didn't find anything. "Maybe it's buried too deep," Roddy muttered. "Could it be that this city is buried a few hundred meters deep? That's troublesome." Merlin Sarah wiped her forehead and frowned. "That can't be right. It's only been a few hundred years. How can it be buried so deep? It's at most a few dozen meters." "Then let's rest for a while and try again." Roddy sat on the ground and looked up at the scorching sun in the clear sky, panting heavily. But his expression suddenly froze. "That's not right. Why did the baby shadow dragon suddenly roll?" Is it hiding from something? Merlin Sarah looked up. You mean in the sky? She threw a fireball, and the orange light rose rapidly. After flying for nearly 100 meters, it gradually slowed down. There seems to be no problem. But as soon as she finished speaking, the fireball suddenly disappeared. Roddy suddenly stood up. Natha and Eudora realized that something was wrong. Merlin Sarah thought of something and released another fireball, but this time, the fireball was condensed with the energy of the elemental plane. 100 meters, 200 meters, when the fireball rose to almost 300 meters, it exploded with a boom. Chapter 1143. It was a very strange feeling. It was as if a hole had appeared in the originally transparent sky, and the area where the explosion had occurred looked like a patch of dark brown soil. This scene lasted for 4 to 5 seconds before the hole began to slowly close and finally disappeared completely. However, the 4 people below were speechless when they saw this scene. After a long time, Eudora was the first to speak. Overlord city is in the sky? This was something that completely broke her understanding. After all, Lachman's mages had spent so much effort and used so much cobalt gold ore to make a floating space tower. Although it was just a small piece of land in front of her, she could not help but think so when she thought about what Roddy was looking for. Roddy and Marinsara obviously confirmed this statement. The latter said, "There is an anti-magic field above." Yes, otherwise the first fireball would not be extinguished. This should be an excellent protective measure. If Lachman's mages come, even if they can find Overlord city, there is nothing they can do. But we still have to confirm how big the area is. After the boundary disappeared, I still can't sense the location of this city. This feeling is too strange. If it was an ordinary magic boundary, she would definitely be able to clearly sense it and confirm the range and location. But this place was really strange. She got up and was about to cast another spell, but suddenly a round hole with a diameter of more than 30 meters suddenly appeared in the sky. Something is wrong. Roddy quickly shouted, "Quickly hide!" Of course, Marinsara would not act recklessly. She immediately raised her hand and the yellow sand that had just been dug around floated up, covering the shadow baby dragon, Natha and Eudora. The yellow sand did not completely cover them. It only smoothed out the traces left by them and the big hole that they had just dug. At the same time, Marinsara chanted a spell in a low voice, turning the outside of the boundary into a light yellow color. From a distance, it looked like a sand dune. If one did not look closely, they would not be able to see any clues. Natha had already taken out her bow, so did Roddy. Eudora held the scepter in her hand and felt a little helpless. She looked at the 3 people and asked softly, "Is there something?" "We're out." As soon as she finished speaking, Roddy stared at the round hole in the air that looked like a gate to another dimension. 2, 3, 4. Hearing this, Eudora looked up and suddenly widened her eyes. 4 armored knights swooped down from the round hole in the sky. From their figures, one could tell that they were women. Beneath these knights were 4 huge monsters that looked like bats. They were flapping their wings as they swooped down from the sky. The reason why Eudora is still shocked is that this monster is almost the same as the monster she asked her priests to transform into. If it is not bigger and has sharp claws on its wings, she may not be able to tell it apart. However, it was obvious that the 4 monsters in front of him weren't beings that were forcefully transformed by the Thuk priests. They were real demons in this form. "Eudora, have you seen such a creature in the capital?" "No. Never." Eudora answered quickly and held the scepter nervously at the same time. Not to mention that she had surrendered. Now, even if she was still the scepter priest of Isika, she would feel scared when she saw this scene. "They are coming. If they just fly over, they shouldn't be able to find us." Marinthra stared at the knights in the front. These guys hovered extremely fast. She could see that the weapons the riders used were metal javelins. At the same time, there was something like a magic wand on their waists, but she didn't know the specific function. The four monsters carried the knights and quickly flew over their heads. Obviously, they didn't find anything strange. They circled back and forth twice. Just when they were about to go back, a small, weird-looking bird flew down from the big hole that let them out. Its wings were close to that of a bird. When it spread out, it was nearly 2 meters long and was black. Its head was disproportionately big. Coupled with the huge ears and the bulging sarcomas on its head, it even looked a little funny. It didn't look like a creature of this dimension. When Roddy saw this guy, he suddenly frowned. "You even have this kind of thing? What is this?" Marinthra had never seen this thing, but Roddy remembered its function from the demon mastery, knowledge that the Witcher, Ducal, gave him. Magic eye. The High Elves call it magic eye. Damn it, prepare for battle. I'm afraid they will find us. As he was speaking, the magic eye in the distance obviously locked on the direction where Roddy and the others were. The ugly big head rushed over and screamed. The four knights who originally planned to fly back also quickly changed their direction and swooped down. The knights raised the javelins in their hands. With the momentum of the dive, the javelins they threw were powerful enough to penetrate armor. "I'll go and fight them in close combat. Marinthra, cover the young dragons with your armor and hide far away. Natha, take Eudora and go in another direction after 2 arrows. 3 seconds later, a round of concentrated shooting. 3, 2, 1. Under Roddy's decisive battle order, Marinthra raised her hand and released 3 fireballs at the moment when the opponents were 200 meters away from her. Then, she immediately released an ice armor on the dark baby dragon beside her, turned around and ran into the distance. Meanwhile, Roddy and Natha had already shot 2 arrows at the same time. Then, he turned around and jumped onto the back of the dark baby dragon. Natha grabbed Eudora and ran in another direction. Boom! There was an explosion in the sky instantly. Because the speed of the dive was extremely fast, only one of the 3 fireballs hit. A knight was blown away on the spot, and his charred body fell along with his mount. On the other hand, Roddy's arrow exploded on the head of the magic eye. The explosive arrow was extremely accurate, and it directly caused a mist of blood to rise in the air. In the next second, 2 of the metal javelins that fell from the sky pierced the ground behind Roddy. The other one hit the ice armor on the top of the dark baby dragon and penetrated it directly. After hitting the dragon scales of the dark baby dragon, it left a wound on the spot. Although the power was amazing, it still bounced off. The dark baby dragon roared and spread its wings. It carried Roddy and ran forward quickly and tried to fly into the air. Not far away, Marinthra knew her kind very well. She raised her hand and blew 2 consecutive roar of wind at the dark baby dragon. With the help of this thrust, Roddy quickly took the dark baby dragon into the air. The remaining 3 knights were obviously a little surprised that there was a dark baby dragon among the enemies. When they were thinking about whether to ask for help, the 4th arrow shot by Natha finally hit the mount of one of them. The guy flapping his wings suddenly screamed and fell to the side, but it was obvious that he couldn't control the monster under his crotch. He fell to the ground with the dark baby dragon, bang! The monster was directly smashed into the sand with the dark baby dragon. Its bones were broken on the spot, and it became a pile of rotten meat. The dark baby dragon that was already in the air accelerated rapidly. Whether it was the impact force or the flying speed, it was far from being comparable to this kind of ordinary demon. The only remaining knight hurled his spear in panic, but it was far away. The dark baby dragon quickly flew up, flipped from above, and landed diagonally behind the enemy. When it swooped down, the enemy suddenly pulled out the stick at her waist. But before she could do anything, the fireball flying from below had already broken her mount in half. In the explosion of flames, the enemy screamed in fear and fell straight to the ground. However, she didn't fall to her death, because Marinthra had used a spell to slow down the descent and captured her on the spot. Roddy wasn't excited. He quickly let the dark baby dragon land on the ground and shouted, "Bring the people up and retreat!" Mobile version of the fastest updated website, M. Chapter 1144. Merlin Sarah didn't ask much. She grabbed the unconscious captive and quickly jumped onto the cockpit on the dragon's back. Turning her head to look at Natha and Eudora, who were running towards them, Merlin Sarah raised her hand to cast a spell. She used her magic to lift them up and threw them onto the other side of the cockpit. Because time was tight, she wasn't gentle this time. Natha had a strong physique. She firmly held onto the gangway of the cockpit. Then she grabbed Eudora, who was in pain from the fall, with her right hand and swung her into the cockpit with the strength of her arm. Then she jumped into the cockpit and closed the cockpit door when the baby dragon began to fly. Click! The sealing buckle was closed. Natha stood in front of the cockpit door and looked up. There were no other creatures appearing from the abrupt round hole in the distant sky, but she was very clear that the enemies were definitely not just the 4 guys riding the monsters. This was a base. No one knew how many enemies there were on it. The bumps when the baby dragon took off made Eudora, who was dizzy from the fall, groan a few times. Natha stuffed her into the seat and fastened the seatbelt. Then she asked, "Are you hurt?" "Yes, no, I'm fine." Eudora quickly changed her words. She was used to living like a princess in the past. People would kneel down to apologize if she touched them. But now she wasn't the high-status scepter priest anymore. She had to endure this little pain. Natha glanced at her and asked, "That was the Tuk tribe just now. Do you know what happened?" "Their armor is the style of the Golden Blade Guards. I haven't seen that monster before, but these people should belong to High Priest Windsor." High Priest. Basically, he is the most powerful person besides Her Majesty Tyria. Natha nodded and didn't speak anymore. At this time, the baby dragon suddenly flapped its wings and took off. Roddy and Merlin Sarah in the next cockpit finally confirmed that no one was chasing them, and they were relieved. Many enemies? At this time, Merlin Sarah finally asked the question in her heart. The appearance of a magic eye, that big-headed monster just now, means that there must be a stable portal to the demonic plane here. This means that the other party is likely to have an organized army of demon lords. It will be very troublesome for us to stay here, because the other party still has something like the anti-magic field. If it's an area attack, I'm not sure we can escape. Even the infant shadow dragon can't escape? Their mounts should be called nightmares. That's the name the high elves gave them. This thing is the lowest level of flying mounts in the demonic plane. If some more powerful fellows come, it will be difficult for the baby dragon to fly above them with a cockpit. At this moment, the effect of Devil's Grasp immediately became apparent. The knowledge in Roddy's mind was enough for him to see the big picture. 5 nightmare knights and a magic eye, this was a standard aerial combat team of the demonic plane. Their appearance was enough for Roddy to confirm many things. Damn it, have the demons really invaded? Maybe even earlier than you and I thought. Roddy was already mentally prepared for this. He glanced at the quest panel and found that the next step of the origin of the divine artifact mission had already been updated. Find more clues on the altar of the temple. Previously, it showed that Roddy had to find the entrance to Hovala City. Now, the mission clearly judged that he had found the entrance, and the clues were further reduced to the temple. Roddy's heart instantly became excited. This meant that there was a chance for the Viper staff to be repaired, and the location was in this temple. But the problem now was that he couldn't just recklessly enter the floating city. The city of Hovala was obviously stranger than he had imagined. A city that could float in the air, had an army of demons, and had an anti-magic domain. No matter how anxious he was, he had to make preparations. Is the person still alive? Thinking of the information in this city, Roddy turned his gaze to the captured prisoner. The prisoner was a strong woman who was one. 8 meters tall, wearing golden armor. She had black hair and fair skin, a typical Tuk tribesman. Her mount was blasted into pieces by Merlinsera's terrifying small fireball, and she fainted on the spot. There were also wounds on her body from the shrapnel, but it seemed to be nothing serious. We can wake her up at any time. Merlinsera placed her hand on the prisoner's forehead and sensed her mental strength and aura. Will this person suddenly turn into a demon or something? No, she doesn't have a demon aura. Roddy was very sure of this, and then turned his head to look outside the cabin. Let's return to La Sia City first. We have to act immediately. 2 minutes after they quickly left Havala City, the hole in the sky seemed to have realized something was wrong, and another team of Nightmare Knights appeared. The 4 knights circled around and immediately discovered the wreckage on the ground. They warned loudly and carefully flew around the area for a long time before one of the knights landed tentatively and examined the corpse on the ground. Not long after, they took part of the wreckage and flew back into the hole. After the 4 knights flew out of the hole, the scenery in front of them changed rapidly. It was as if they had flown out of the well of a city. As far as the eye could see, a huge circular city with a diameter of more than 4 kilometers came into view. The buildings in this city were obviously maintained in the style of 500 or 600 years ago. Most of them were made of stone, and the tallest building was the Marhala Temple in the center of the city. Some of the buildings in the city were in use, but they were obviously blacksmiths. The ding-ding-dang-dang-dang sounds of knocking could be heard incessantly. At the same time, there was also a strange fluctuation, which was obviously different from the elemental fluctuation of this plane. The 4 Nightmare Knights landed on a square, and the leader quickly ran to the temple next to it with the remains of the knights. The temple was heavily guarded, and at a glance, there were at least 500 guards patrolling in different directions. Even if the Nightmare Knight approached, he was quickly stopped and checked 3 times before he was allowed to go. The simple and unadorned temple was similar to the one in Duriel, but the material was obviously badly worn. The murals were not as exquisite, and there were no exquisite carvings engraved by craftsmen. There were only some rough statues and inlaid gold. This was the decoration style of the Marhala Temple 600 years ago. After entering, the Nightmare Captain did not dare to look up at anything. She only dared to look at something in front of her. After entering the hall, she knelt on one knee and said, "High Priest, they all sacrificed themselves to our Lord. But we did not find Tria's body." High Priest Windsor, who had his back to her, frowned and turned his head. "Who did it?" "High Priest, when we went out, the enemy had already disappeared." "What?" High Priest Windsor was 45 years old this year. He looked very young, but he had been in a high position for a long time. At this time, his voice was slightly raised, and the Nightmare Captain's forehead was wet with sweat. "Judge the strength of the enemy." "High Priest, the enemy should be a powerful mage. They were all killed by the explosion of the fireball spell, and there were also a few arrows. If it was only the fireball, High Priest Windsor could basically conclude that it was people from Lesamon. But if there were arrows, it was most likely a mercenary team from a small country. They might have some way to hide themselves, but it was indeed difficult to find them in the vast desert. However, High Priestess Windsor was not afraid of exposing anything. She had no intention of punishing him. After asking him to leave, she turned to another area of the temple and said to the priests on a huge magic circle, "Change position, move 50 kilometers south." "Yes, High Priest." Mobile version of the fastest updated website, M. Chapter 1145. Isika Kingdom, the capital of the Deist Palace. The area of the palace was very large, and the first main building after entering from the outside was the conference hall. Due to the need to resist the sand and dust, the hall looked like half an ostrich egg from the outside. But if one walked into the palace from the conference hall, one would find that the sleeping quarters and gardens were very small, and the Maglar temple, towering in the center of the city, was even larger. This building had been built for more than 10 years, and its size was far larger than the temples in Duriel City and Havala City. It was supported by more than 400 huge stone pillars, with a height of 40 meters and a width of more than 300 meters. Furthermore, there were countless rooms inside. The temple was where the priests prayed and performed rituals, but this temple was never open to ordinary people. At this moment, the priests of the Tuk tribe were not as proficient in studying the divine spells of Theseus as they had been in the past few decades. Instead, many of the beautiful priests had chosen to learn mental charm spells like Doris had done in the past. The ones in charge of teaching them were the trusted subordinates of High Priest Windsor. The guards in the palace were also the personal guards of the High Priest dressed in golden armor. Windsor was equivalent to the supervisor of the temple, and she only needed to answer to Tyria alone. The Tuk clan was a political and religious union, and as Her Majesty, Tyria had absolute power. She was the spokesperson of the Theseus religion on the mainland. In layman's terms, any word she said was equivalent to the command of the god. At this moment, Her Majesty was not standing in front of the solemn altar of the temple like before. Instead, she was in a secret room directly below the temple, facing the wavering sphere in front of her with her arms open. Energy from another plane drifted out of the spherical portal like smoke. Countless purplish-black magic patterns once again appeared on Tyria's body under her muslin clothes. She raised her head, enjoying the satisfaction brought by the increase in her strength, her face filled with infatuation. This process had been carried out countless times, and the strength of Tyria's body had also crossed from ordinary to an unimaginable level. "It's enough." The whispers that lingered in her ears caused Tyria to open her eyes. The 22-year-old king slowly opened his mouth. "Although I'm strong enough to withstand the impact of my descent, I'm still lacking a few magic crystals to complete the preparations of the magic circle. Hurry up." The portal was obviously unable to withstand the power of the character in front of it. When the hoarse voice came, the spherical portal that reflected the scenery of the other plane clearly rippled violently, but it soon recovered and stabilized. Tyria slowly heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that the powerful existence was no longer projecting his gaze and consciousness over. She lowered her head and looked at her arm. The current Tyria could defeat any dissident in Icica by herself. She stood at the peak of the human race, and even mages like Lassiman who possessed great power were not worth mentioning in front of her. The power that she had obtained so easily also caused her ambition to expand rapidly. Pure strength could no longer satisfy Tyria. She knew what kind of existence was on the other side of the portal, but she still made a deal with the other party. The transmission door in the secret room was not closed. The guards on both sides were not the guards under the chief priest Windsor, but 4 figures that Roddy, Kardashian and others were definitely familiar with, the Doomguard. Back then, Augustine and the demon monarch Kaswara opened the portal and sent out a large number of infected beasts and Doomguard. The latter were the elite warriors under the demon monarch, each of them armed to the teeth, powerful, skilled in martial arts, and extremely loyal. But these 4 huge Doomguard obviously treated Tyria as their master. When she turned around and left, the Doomguard followed closely, the huge weapons strapped on their waists lightly colliding with the metal armors, producing a series of jingle-dang sounds. This secret room was not cramped. On the contrary, because the foundation of the temple's stone pillars was extremely deep, the space here was almost as spacious as the upper floor. And after walking out of the secret room located in the center, a pure gold base appeared in front of Tyria. But this base was surrounded by 12 figures in black robes. They wore hoods and were constantly chanting cryptic incantations in the center of the base. Tyria did not pay attention to the 12 mysterious spellcasters. She just glanced at the invisible aura and then walked towards the stairs. The guards at the door were also Doomguard, and on both sides were 4 infected beasts that constantly waved their tentacles. Teria walked out expressionlessly and followed the stairs from underground to above ground. The figure of the Doomguard stopped at the stairs and then hid in the shadows. His Majesty asked the guard in golden armor in front of him, who was kneeling on one knee, "How long until Windsor's altar is ready?" "Your Majesty, the last batch of magic crystal is on the way. It will arrive in about 3 days." Teria clenched her fist, trying to hide the excitement in her eyes. She narrowed her eyes and nodded. "Continue your work, guard." "Yes, Your Majesty." Only after Teria left did the guard captain slowly stand up. She wiped the cold sweat off her forehead. As a guard who knew the inside story, she could deeply feel the changes that had happened to His Majesty in the past few months. Perhaps even Teria herself did not notice the oppressive feeling brought by the aura. 3,000 kilometers away, Roddy had been busy since he jumped off the baby shadow dragon after arriving at La Sia City. The military order was issued, and the paratroopers began to assemble again. However, their battle plan was not immediately drawn up, and their weapons were replaced with cold weapons used in non-magic environments. Although Irwin and the others did not know where their next destination was, they all knew the battle environment they were about to face. At this time, in the meeting room in the tower, Sodeler looked at the map and frowned. "Prime Minister, do you really want to go in person? Only I have the experience and knowledge to deal with demons, and only a small team can avoid the enemy's detection as much as possible, fully armed." Roddy was now calculating the time and distance needed to fly to the destination on the map. Of course, he knew that this was a risk, but Roddy was very clear that there was never an inevitability in war. Victory was always piled up by countless decisions and details. The news of Eudora's defeat had not yet reached Isika, and the enemy's mentality was still relaxed. After he found the location of Havala City, the enemy did not realize his existence. Whether it was the overall situation or the details, he was in an absolute position of initiative. Only by continuing to seize this opportunity to expand his advantage could he restore the Viper's Kiss as soon as possible. "Report!" The guard's voice came from outside the door. Sodeler glanced at him. "Speak." "Advisor Eudora has obtained some information from the prisoners of war." The guard handed over a piece of paper full of words. Sodeler took it and spread it on the table. He and Roddy read it together. However, after reading it, both of them took a deep breath. Roddy no longer hesitated. "We will leave in an hour, Sodeler. This time we have no other choice." Sodeler's expression was solemn, and he replied with a military salute. Mobile version of the fastest update website, M. Chapter 1146. Roddy. Sally raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw the heavily armed Roddy suddenly walk in. However, she frowned slightly when she wanted to get up. She finally sat back down and tried to look calm. "Did you just come back?" Her condition had been getting worse recently. Roddy looked at Sally's HP after he came in. His heart tightened, but his expression did not change. He said in a low voice, "I found a clue, but I don't know if it will work. So, I'll go and check it out first." He swallowed and continued. "Get ready. If it works, I'll get the army to support immediately. At the same time, I'll get Natha to help you go there." Sally's eyes lit up. Of course, she was happy to hear that she could be saved. But the monarch then frowned. "Is it dangerous?" Roddy knew that he could not deceive her. He explained, "I'm in the dark now, and the enemy is in the light. I know the enemy's habits very well. The demon has appeared?" Sally almost immediately realized what he was talking about. She was a little excited and wanted to stand up. However, her face turned pale and she almost fell forward. Roddy hurriedly went forward and caught her. "Don't worry. Relax, relax. Breathe. Look at me. Breathe." He said this because Sally was really in a daze, as if she was out of breath. She only managed to regain her composure after a few seconds. After she regained consciousness, she did not care about herself at all. She hurriedly asked Roddy, "There's a portal to the demonic plane?" "This news. I've already informed them, but we must investigate now." Roddy did not dare to delay any longer. He whispered, "I have a hunch that this time we will definitely find a way. You must stabilize your body. Time is tight. Natha will come to pick you up later. Try not to move. If you can sit, don't stand. Don't walk to the airport. Listen to me. You must listen to me." The Green Dragon Lord's necklace originally had a duration of 98 days, but this number was not something that could be reduced properly. As Sally's condition worsened, her HP decreased faster and faster. The necklace's duration might last for a while, but Sally's HP was clearly not going to last for long. Sally had been in a coma for the past few days. She knew her condition, but she never dared to show it in front of Roddy. However, on this day, both sides understood that this might be their last chance. Roddy didn't waste any more time. He gently kissed her forehead, let Sally sit back in the armchair, and quickly left the room. Rushing through the corridor, Roddy shouted at the aides and attendants waiting outside the door to assign tasks. "Go find something, I need a strong stimulant. The stronger the smell, the better. Something like ripe pachinko or fermented vicarat grass. Send it to the tower within half an hour. There's no limit to the type, but at least 2 water sacks." "Yes, Prime Minister. Go to the fabric store in the city and look for orange cloth. Orange. The brighter ones. Get at least one. If you can't make up your mind, get a few more similar colors." "Yes, Prime Minister." After making the arrangements, he went straight to the laboratory outside the tower. When he opened the door, Marinsura was already ready to activate the realm portal. "Steady your breath, we're ready to begin." Marinsura could see Roddy's fingers trembling slightly. She knew that it wasn't because of nervousness, but rather fear. "I found a location. It's a fire elemental, but it's very dangerous. Even if it's dangerous, we have to try. We don't have time." The reason why he was so anxious was because Roddy was afraid that after entering Huvela City, he would be affected by the anti-magic field, and his combat power would be greatly reduced. Although he could shoot arrows, if he had a powerful elemental pet to help him, it would be greatly beneficial. Marinsura didn't waste any time and immediately started the process of activating the portal. Roddy took out the summoning stone materials that he had found in a hurry and did the same thing as summoning the earth elemental lizard. However, this time, the fire elemental that appeared near the portal was nowhere near as docile as the lizard. Roddy's forehead was slightly sweating. He tried to use his mental strength to communicate with the fire elemental creature that was more than a meter tall, but he didn't get much of a response. The creature looked like a red monkey with a red scar on its forehead that looked like lava. Its eyes were also completely red. "If it doesn't work, give up," Marinsura couldn't help but say when she saw Roddy's frown. "Let me try again." Roddy moved the summoning stone closer and the creature finally responded. The monkey took a few steps forward and approached the portal. It tried to touch the stone with its hand, however, when it touched the stone, it suddenly bared its teeth and was obviously ready to attack Roddy. Roddy was still trying to establish a magic contract, but he had to stop halfway. He quickly grabbed the stone and retreated. He didn't expect the monkey to directly pass through the portal and jump straight into the laboratory. Damn it! At this point, Roddy couldn't help but curse. Before he could react, a violent fire element was instantly released. The fire elemental monkey didn't look big, but in an instant its whole body was covered in flames, ready to attack in all directions. Bam! Before it could spit out a small fireball, its chest was hit by Marinsura's frost spear. However, this guy's defense was obviously beyond imagination. The frost spear that could pierce through armor stopped 3 to 4 centimeters into its body and quickly melted. The monkey roared, and a scorching aura quickly spread in all directions, as if it was going to burn the entire laboratory into ashes. However, just as it exploded, it was firmly locked in by a barrier. Marinsura shouted in a low voice. She clenched her fist, and the invisible barrier instantly shrank, squeezing the monkey's body until it became smaller. She turned to look at Roddy. "Can we sign a contract like this?" Roddy tried a few times, but found that perhaps because the opponent's level was too high, and he wasn't familiar with this kind of high-level elemental creature, the contract failed continuously. Seeing Roddy shake his head, Marinsura frowned and no longer hesitated. She waved her finger, and a disc-shaped white light flashed across the monkey's neck. The fire elemental monkey was instantly decapitated, and it fell to the ground. Its body started to burn due to the escape of the elements, but Marinsura quickly used her magic to extinguish the flames, so the guy's body was relatively intact. Roddy had already unsheathed his sword and was ready to engage in melee combat, but Marinsura's reaction speed and strength were clearly beyond his imagination. She raised her hand and froze the black corpse and head. "I'll keep this for later research. I'll search for the coordinates now and try again." "Okay." Roddy heaved a sigh of relief. He was grateful for Marinsura's full support at this time. He said in a low voice, "Thank you." Marinsura glanced at him, but didn't say anything. She turned her head and started the summoning again. 10 minutes later, Roddy stuffed a cold summoning stone into his pocket and walked out of the room with Marinsura. However, when the door opened, Roddy found Naifi standing at the door. It seemed that she had been waiting for a while. Mobile version of the fastest website, M. Chapter 1147. Naifi? Roddy asked. He then noticed that she was not wearing her usual clothes. Instead, she was wearing a short robe with a silver belt. There were a lot of tools and small boxes hanging from it. Not only that, she was also wearing a pair of gloves with exposed links, a dagger on the side of her boots, and a pair of goggle-like glasses on her forehead. She was carrying a square backpack on her back, and her hair was tied up neatly. The little girl had become a slim and graceful young lady. Naifi looked at Roddy and said, "If it's about scouting, maybe I can help you." Of course, Roddy would not agree. "No, the enemy's area is too dangerous, but I can help you avoid danger." Naifi pointed at her own eyes. "Even if it's in the anti-magic area, I can still do it." Seeing that Roddy was about to refuse, Marinsura took the initiative and said, "Take her with you. If she can always see the elements, our assimilation will be much smoother. As for safety, I'll be responsible for protecting her." Everything was based on the success rate of the operation. Roddy pursed his lips for a few seconds. Naifi looked down at her toes and said, "Brother Roddy, I've grown up, let's go to the square." Roddy sighed and finally agreed. He believed that Marinsura could protect Naifi, and at the same time, he knew that Naifi was definitely not a burden. Perhaps she was still a child before, but after 2 years of training and learning in Lassiman, this genius girl had already changed a lot. Seeing that Roddy agreed, Naifi finally relaxed her tense body and quickly followed him. Her backpack seemed to be filled with a lot of things because it made a lot of noise when she walked. Marinsura raised her hand and the noise disappeared instantly. "Be careful when you get there." "Okay. Thank you, Sister Marinsura." Marinsura did not say anything else. She just nodded silently and walked down the tower with Roddy. At the entrance of the tower, the things that Roddy had ordered were all ready. Although Lasha City had gone through a war, it was still rich in resources. The aides quickly found 3 bags of pungent potions and 7 or 8 kinds of cloth. Roddy took all the potions and carried a roll of cloth. He glanced at Kasley, Eudora, and Mag, who was the first to be captured, and said, "I need a volunteer who knows the Thuk tribe to go and investigate with me. Who is willing to come?" Mag quickly lowered his head. Kasley was about to step forward, but Eudora had already raised her scepter. I am willing. When this scepter priest was brought to search Havala City, she was actually very reluctant. But when she saw the personal guards of High Priestess Windsor riding demons, she realized this of course. Casley looked at her in surprise, but Eudora did not give her a chance to ask questions. She had stepped to the front. Prime Minister, what do you need me to do? Prime Minister, Marinsara of Casley said, go change of clothes immediately. Go. Roddy didn't waste any more words and strode off into the distance. Yes, Prime Minister. Eudora bowed and then strode back to her dormitory without a care for her image. Mag and Casley were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. Everyone knew that the Prime Minister's mission was extremely dangerous, so why was Eudora so proactive? After the scepter priest ran into the house, he quickly changed into a short shirt and found a belt to wear. There were still a lot of divine props in her room. At this time, they were all fully armed and hanging on her belt. At the same time, Eudora also put on her signet ring. She clenched her scepter and ran out in a hurry. The prop hanging on her waist knocks Eudora back and forth. She feels that she has never run like this before. Soldiers and pedestrians on the street all look at her, wondering why this gorgeous tuckwoman is in such a hurry. But she didn't stop. She ran all the way to the square and found that Roddy had helped Naife into the cockpit. Merlin-Sarah glanced at her and raised her chin. Get in. Eudora quickly climbed up the ladder and buckled her seatbelt expertly after entering the cockpit. Merlin-Sarah sat in front of her this time. The cockpit door closed. After a familiar jolt, the baby dragon took off rapidly and spiraled up into the sky. Merlin-Sarah ignored the tuck priest who was still panting behind her. She picked up a small cone-shaped magic circle and looked at it after activating the crystal. Then, she said, Can you hear me? Naife's voice came from it. The connection is successful. I can hear you now. Roddy then said, All right, now I will make some simple arrangements for the plan later, because I just discovered that the enemy's position has changed. Eudora raised her eyebrows and looked at this small walkie-talkie. She felt that this world was completely different from the one she was familiar with. 2 hours later, in Havala City, the Tuck tribe's slaves were busy moving rocks into the city. There were more than 4,000 people in the city. Other than the 2,000 elite guards who guarded the temple, the rest were all male servants. Their task was to break the buildings, foundations and other items in Havala City into pieces and transport them to the vicinity of the temple in small carts. These slaves didn't know magic or divinity, so they didn't know that the fragments they were digging were the raw materials for the anti-magic field of the frontline troops. Beautiful, fair-skinned female overseers roamed around with whips in hand, sternly reprimanding the slacking slaves and urging them to speed up. Near the central temple of Havala City, one could occasionally see groups of gigantic apocalypse guardians guarding the core area. There were more than 200 of them. At the same time, in the corners of the buildings near the temple, there were more than 500 infected beasts walking back and forth. 40 magic eyes occasionally flew around the temple. There were more than 100 nightmares resting in the 3 stables. Guards in golden armor came in from time to feed them purple crystals. Unknowingly, the clouds in the sky gradually increased, and shadows were cast on Havala City. Suddenly, nightmares looked up at the sky, but after staring for a while, they slowly lay back down. Not long after, more and more dark clouds gathered in the surroundings, causing the light to darken. Dull thunder rumbled, but this was not a rare occurrence for the people of Havala. This city had not always stayed in the desert. Thunderstorms were a common occurrence near the southern region, so no one paid attention to the occasional lightning strike. Mobile version of the fastest updated website, M. Chapter 1148. Whoosh! The four of them landed on the ground almost at the same time after passing through the enchantment on the side of the city. Then they quickly ran toward the broken wall in front of them. After running to the corner of the wall, they finally let out a sigh of relief. Roddy glanced at the map. After activating demon tracking, he could clearly see the location of the nearby demons. Now they were in the blind spot of the demons. Eudora held her scepter tightly and looked very nervous. But Marinsura was much calmer. She looked around and said in a low voice, "There is no anti-magic effect here. But the stone buildings near the temple still have the anti-magic effect." Nephi pointed to the center of the city and said in a low voice. When they arrived near the city, they hovered about 1,000 meters above the ground and used the invisibility enchantment as a cover. Roddy's knowledge from demon mastery told him that the magic eyes, as a scouting unit, rarely observed the creatures above their head. They were only more sensitive to everything below the horizon. Therefore, Roddy and the others were fully prepared. With the help of Marinsura and Nephi's magic, they left the baby shadow dragons and entered from the edge of the city where the enchantment was the weakest. They were able to do this because Nephi could clearly see the energy fluctuations. Normally, anyone who entered the barrier would cause energy fluctuations and make noises, but with the clouds and thunder created by Marinsura, as well as the location they chose, they didn't attract any attention. "Okay, how do we get closer?" "Follow me. Oh, take this water bag and the cloth with you. If there is any accident, listen to my command." Roddy looked at the floating magic eye in the distance. The magic eye was not sensitive to targets above its head. However, it was good at monitoring the city streets. Even if it was 200 or 300 meters away, it could still easily detect any abnormalities. So Roddy decided to try his best to walk through the gaps between the buildings instead of swaggering through them. The whole city was enveloped by a spherical anti-magic field that was about 10 meters thick, but most of the areas were still usable for magic. Therefore, with the help of Marinsura and Nephi, they silently advanced through the ruins of the city and finally arrived at a courtyard. There was no one here, and it looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. However, after Roddy entered the house, he searched the ground and suddenly flipped open a door. "Wow, you can even find it?" Nephi had been looking left and right, and she was shocked by this scene. She could feel that the items under the door had strong magical waves, and they were obviously not ordinary items. Eudora was in disbelief, but Marinsula knew that Roddy could always find some strange clues. She asked, "You already knew?" "I can sense the location of a weapon, so I can locate this city." Roddy told the truth. After opening the secret door, he had already seen the Save the Tuk tribesmen. Quest reward, Grasp of Turin. It was a white one-handed staff. Because it had been lying there for a long time, its surface was covered with dust. However, it could be seen that the patterns on it were complicated, and the craftsmanship was exquisite. There were also inlaid metal decorations on it. For a staff, these decorations were unnecessary. However, it obviously had other symbolic meanings. There were some strange potion bottles under the secret door, which had now dried up and lost their effectiveness. However, some divine props were still preserved, such as a notebook made of animal skin, a ring, and a stone that looked like a talisman. Roddy did not speak, but Eudora was a little excited. She looked at the talisman and whispered, This pattern, only the scepter priest has it." She was a scepter priest herself, but now she was talking about the scepter priest from 600 years ago. At that time, the religion of Theseus was much more powerful than it was now. At the same time, because of the great power of the gods, the props they made were also very powerful. So many scepter priests of the Tuk tribe still used the props passed down from hundreds of years ago. The scepter in Eudora's hand at this time had a history of 200 years. It was passed down from her family. Roddy's eyes had glanced at the attributes of these equipment. Except for the staff, the rest were written with profession restrictions. In other words, Only the Tuk-tried priests could use it. In Roddy's eyes, their attributes were not very strong. It could only be said to be a standard advanced level 35 epic equipment. However, he had seen a lot of things, but Eudora did not have such experience. She obviously could not move her eyes away. Roddy did not talk nonsense and said directly, "Except for the staff, you can take the rest. Leave the staff here." He was afraid that if he took the staff, the quest would show the next step directly. Then, he would not be able to lock the position of Hovala City. Eudora immediately obeyed and took the ring and talisman in her hand. She seemed to know who these things belonged to, and her eyes were obviously a little excited. But at this time, no one had time to ask her. Roddy continued to arrange the tasks. Eudora stays here. Later, Nephi helps me to observe the energy point of the magic circle. Merlin, Sarah, cover me. Let's get close to the temple. I will see if there is a chance to enter. That, Eudora suddenly interrupted. I think the pattern of the temple here is the same as the temple in the king's city. If we want to enter, I am afraid the sewer under the temple is easier to enter than the outside. There is a sewer here? The current Marhala temple in Isika is said to be built according to the Hovala city, but I don't know if there is. It's just a guess, and I don't know if the guards will notice here. This was indeed the advantage of leading the way. Otherwise, Roddy really wanted to find a chance directly from outside or on the roof. He asked in detail again, confirmed the details and location, and took Nephi and Merlin Sarah out of the house. As a result, the closer to the temple, the more heavily guarded it was when they were 200 meters away from the temple, because Nephi's pace was a little slow. When they just got under the wall, a passing magic eye in the distance suddenly turned its head and flew straight here. Roddy didn't poke his head out, but through the detection on the map, he noticed that the enemy was approaching. He didn't panic, but immediately waved to Merlin Sarah and asked her to take out the roll of orange cloth she carried with her. The latter reacted quickly and immediately unfolded the cloth. Roddy pulled the edge of the cloth and used all his strength to cover the three of them. At the same time, he used his left hand to open the water bag hanging on his waist and sprinkled the liquid nearby. In order to cover themselves with the cloth, Roddy, Merlin Sarah and Nephi huddled together and leaned against the stone wall. When the water bag was opened, the pungent smell almost made Nephi sneeze, but just when she was about to sneeze, her mouth was tightly covered by Roddy. The magic eye wobbled and flew above the three of them. The fastest website for mobile version, M. Chapter 1149. The ugly, demonic eye flapped its wings and stared at the gray ruins and bright orange cloth. However, its eyes were wide open as though it didn't see anything amiss. The knowledge of demon mastery told Roddy that the demon eye couldn't distinguish orange. In its eyes, the orange cloth looked like a gray stone from a distance, not much different from the wall and the ground beside it. Ordinary people wouldn't know this at all. They might even think it was ridiculous. But at this time, the sensitive, magic eye did not see anything strange. It only opened and closed its nostrils, circled around, and landed not far away. Because Roddy and the others were wearing magic equipment that emitted waves, the demon eye was very sensitive to this kind of thing. However, before it could get close, the pungent sour smell drifted over. The demon eye reacted much more quickly than Naifi. It screamed and covered its nose as it retreated. Then it quickly retreated into the distance, with no intention of coming back. It can't stand the smell? For the demon eye, Naifi said, rolling up the orange cloth. After confirming that it was safe, Roddy rolled up the orange cloth and continued, "This is the summary of the High Elves' knowledge. You must remember it." Naifi nodded vigorously, her face full of admiration. Merlin and Sala were also curious, but the smell was too strong for their eyes. They didn't say anything and just kept their mouths shut. They held their breaths and moved in another direction. Finally, they found the entrance to a sewer. The entrance was on the street. If they wanted to go there, they would obviously be seen by the infected beast. Later, you two work together to attract their attention. Then I'll try to disguise myself as a demon and sneak in. Wait for me nearby. Before I come out, I'll ask the Earth Elemental Lizard to give you a signal. If there's an accident, retreat to Eudora's side. Must we bring her? Marinsura didn't like this priest very much. She even felt that Roddy bringing her along was a complete burden. Try to bring her along. If necessary, we can push her out. She should be able to stall the enemies for a while. Marinsura nodded in agreement. Nephi doesn't say anything. Although it is a bit cruel, the emergency plan itself is a last resort. Although Roddy now treats Eudora as cannon fodder, in fact, if something really happens, the most dangerous one is Roddy himself. The rest of them can only save themselves according to the order of importance. At this moment, she truly felt the cruelty brought about by war. Every decision they made could be a path of no return. Nephi, can you check if there's an anti-magic field inside the temple? Ah? Let me see. She came back to her senses and looked around. She changed a few angles and finally said in a low voice, "There are all the buildings outside the temple, but there is no light in the temple itself. There is only a very strong white light at the center of the center. That should be the power of the gods, but it is very condensed and did not disperse. That is to say, the temples should be able to cast spells. Except for the area where the ball of light is. It should be." Nephi rubbed her eyes. "The ball of light is too bright. Okay, no need to check. I just want to confirm it for safety." Roddy patted her backpack and asked, "Did you bring the puppet spider?" "Yes, I also took the time to improve it." Nephi took out the puppet spider. Roddy found that the mechanism, which was originally covered with magic patterns, was wrapped in a dark brown cloth with some patterns on it. From a distance, it looked very similar to a real spider. "Good job." Roddy encouraged her. Nephi smiled and squinted her eyes. She handed the spider and the controller to him. Marinsura made a gesture, and Roddy nodded. He took off the bow and let them hold it. But before they were ready, a black shadow suddenly flashed in the sky. The three of them were so scared that they quickly lowered their heads. Whoosh! A night incubus knight suddenly streaked across the sky above Overlord City. After landing on a square not far away, a figure wearing a priest robe strode towards the direction of the divine temple without a care for his image. The guards and demons around her were startled and quickly stopped her. But after verifying her identity, they dispersed. Roddy knew that this was his chance. He immediately dashed to the entrance of the sewers and quickly crawled into it. After using demon affinity and disguise, no one noticed his shadow. Historically, Overlord City was located in a place with abundant water and grass. Now, the city was flying in the sky. The 1.5-meter wide sewers were dry and wide, but Roddy didn't dare to run in big strides. He was afraid that the infected beasts with sensitive hearing would hear him. He used his magic tentacles and silently crawled into the sewers. Through the map, Roddy could clearly see the densely packed patrolling demons around him. He even crawled slowly under their feet to the side of the temple. However, when he reached the edge of the outer wall of the Marhala temple, Roddy found that the passage was blocked by a thick stone door. He couldn't move forward at all. Glancing at the status bar, Roddy confirmed that there was no anti-magic domain notification. At the same time, a notification appeared for the origin of the artifact mission. You have entered the temple. Look for more clues in the central area. Save the Thuks. Since he didn't pick up the Turn's grip staff, the mission did not show the next step. Roddy adjusted his position and activated the spider puppet in his hand. After entering the control interface, he controlled it to slowly crawl into the sewers inside the temple. At this moment, Roddy heard footsteps coming from above. He quickly controlled the spider to crawl out of a leak. Soon, he heard voices coming from inside the temple. Priest Ankra, please show me your seal. A few seconds later, the high priest is at the altar. Go in. Okay. After a series of footsteps, the Ankra priest said hurriedly, High priest. Her Majesty Tyria's ceremony is about to begin. She's in a hurry? High Priestess Windsor's voice was heard. It was very calm, but it made Priest Ankra's voice tremble. High Priestess, Her Majesty Tyria has urged us to speed up the transportation of the last batch of magic crystals 4 times. We have tried our best to delay it, but it seems like the fellow at the door has run out of patience. After a pause, she continued, Fortunately, our preparations are sufficient. The transportation of the magic crystal does not need to be delayed any longer. As long as it arrives around noon tomorrow, I will have the city of Hovela arrive in the sky above the District Kingdom by then. Yes, High Priest. After a few seconds, Roddy didn't hear any movement. Ankra, if you have anything to say, just say it. High Priest. Doing this, it's really. Some people will lose themselves for the sake of power, but I will not. Windsor placed the scepter on the ground and continued, For Tapri. The Ankra priest seemed to have let go of some doubts in his heart. He pressed his forehead hard against the ground and cried tears of joy. For the glory of the true God. Mobile version of the fastest updated website, M. Chapter 1150. Hearing this name, Roddy was obviously stunned. Normal believers of the religion, Theseus, would not call the god by his name. In history, they were known as the true god or the supreme god. Roddy had never seen any records of the real names of the gods in the information he had read. But when the name Tapri appeared here, it immediately reminded him of the strange experience he had in the prison of time and space. At that time, Corsius, the god who used the quantum computer to create the Earthbreaker on Earth, once mentioned the name Tapri, and said that he was the master of the Viper's Kiss. This did not mean that Tapri was the priest who created the scepter, but that he was the owner of the scepter's divine power, the true god worshipped by the ancient religion Theseus. What was more coincidental was that Roddy had received the divine power of this god, and became a false god for a short period of time. Knowing this, Roddy was very excited, but he was more curious about what these people were planning to do. Tyria seemed to be preparing to start some kind of ritual, while the High Priest Windsor obviously had other plans, and was secretly obstructing and arranging something. There was too little information, and Roddy could not make any more judgments. He could only continue to control the spider puppet to climb up the stone pillar, hoping to hear more voices. But after the High Priest Ankra finished talking, he quickly left, and the High Priest Windsor went in another direction. Roddy stared at the map. He could only track Revenant or Demon on the map, and if he could not see inside the house, he would not be able to determine the specific location of these people. But Roddy had many skills, and he immediately activated the Witcher's vision and looked up. This skill was almost the same as Nefri's talent, and could be used to observe the flow of the elements. But the reason why he brought Nefri along was because her ability was not affected by the anti-magic field, and could even observe the anti-magic field itself. Roddy's skill was not affected at this time, so when he looked over, he immediately saw the flashing white light on the central altar and a few figures surrounded by white light moving. The priest of Windsor is obviously the brightest one. Roddy hurriedly controls the spider to follow her from the side of the wall. He hears what she says to the priests. Eliza, Tavenda, Casa, all of you prepare for the ritual. None of the 3 emissaries can be missing. Your responsibilities are far heavier than anyone else's. No matter what happens, don't pay attention to it. I'll use all of my power to protect you. Yes, High Priest. 3 female voices rang out. Roddy could see that the 3 of them seemed to have something different in their bodies compared to the other priests. The others were radiating white light, but they were obviously a little gray. But because there were too many walls and floors, Roddy could not see clearly. He let the spider climb higher along the wall, intending to continue monitoring for a while. At the same time, he carefully observed the structure of the temple. Obviously, the altar was emitting white divine light, and there were no demons in the entire temple. But Roddy suddenly paused. He found that there was something wrong with the guard in golden armor in the corner. This guy was standing dutifully like the other guards, but there was a necklace around his neck that was filled with a light purple light. Roddy could tell that this thing was similar to the light on the demons. He did not wait for more. The Witcher's vision skill's duration ended, and Roddy had no choice but to focus on the spider puppet again. Then he vaguely heard Windsor's command. Adjust direction, speed up. This should be controlling the city of Havilah and moving towards Iceka. But Roddy did not expect that when he felt the slight tremor and acceleration of the ground under his feet, the center of the altar suddenly burst into white light. The release of divine power caused the anti-magic field to appear in the temple in an instant, and it began to slowly spread. Roddy immediately saw the familiar symbol on the status bar, but he climbed steadily in the sewer and was not affected at all. However, the puppet spider that was clinging to the wall immediately lost its momentum and the effect of magic power attachment. It immediately fell to the ground with a crack. "What's that sound?" The guards immediately shouted from inside the temple. Even though he was far away, Roddy could hear the dense footsteps coming like raindrops. His expression tightened, and he immediately realized that he could not wait any longer, so he quickly moved towards the exit of the sewer. Roddy did not know that when the city moved, the range of the divine power radiation in the temple would increase. At this moment, the sewer he was in was the anti-magic field, and after running 30 or 40 meters with his body bent, Roddy found that he had run to the edge of the anti-magic field, and the range was clearly increasing. He hurriedly sped up and used the magic tentacles to help his body leave the sewer. When he reached the exit, he could already hear the sound of horns and shouts coming from the entrance of the temple. Damn it. Roddy knew that the demons must have entered a state of high alert, but when he glanced at the demon tracking on the map bar, he found that the demons above him had actually gone in 3 different directions, completely avoiding the sewer exit above his head. Without much time to think, he immediately jumped out, and then rolled behind the mud wall where Marinsura and Nephi were. When he took the bow from Marinsura, Roddy found that Nephi was controlling the 3 control circles back and forth. Go! He immediately understood why those demons went in the opposite direction. Obviously, Nephi had arranged the puppets in advance, and now they were attracting the attention of the enemies. But with the expansion of the anti-magic field, the puppets would soon lose their effectiveness. So, Roddy immediately took the 2 of them to the room where Eudora was in the distance. "Do we still care about Eudora? It's faster to leave directly," Marinsura asked, but Roddy replied, "We must take her with us. You take Nephi and run out of the city, I will go and call her." Before they ran far, the anti-magic field obviously affected the puppets. The attracted demons found that they had been fooled, and they immediately hissed angrily. And the magic eye immediately locked the position of Roddy and others, and commanded the demons to chase in the direction where Roddy was. At this time, Marinsura had already run to the edge of the city with Nephi. She took Nephi and jumped out directly, disappearing from everyone's sight. Roddy and Eudora were 50 meters behind. When this scepter priest saw the aggressive demons, she had already thought that she would be abandoned. But she didn't expect that Roddy would use the bow and arrows to cover her escape. Of course, she couldn't keep up with Roddy's speed, but she didn't become a burden. She released the divine spell that she had prepared in advance. The dazzling light and aura of the divine spell made the magic eye scream and fall to the ground. At the same time, the infected beasts and doomsday guardians who were chasing them stopped. "Here we are, jump!" Roddy rushed to the edge of the city with her. At this time, More than a dozen nightmare knights had already taken off, and they were aiming at them. Raising the bow and shooting 2 guided arrows, Roddy turned around and saw that she was stunned. He immediately scolded, "What are you doing? Jump!" Chapter 1151. The Scepter Priestess's divine power level was not low, but she had never learned how to fly. Eudora looked at the rapidly enlarging ground and felt that she would be smashed into pieces. She did not expect that her body would suddenly be pulled by 3 or 4 magic tentacles. She looked around and found that Roddy's magic had condensed into a fixed wing behind him. He was pulling her to glide away. In front of them, the shadow baby dragon was flying steadily with its wings spread out. Merlin Sarah, who was standing on top of the cockpit, raised her hand and cast a spell at Roddy and Eudora. She used her magic to catch Roddy and Eudora and threw them onto the dragon's back. The door of the shadow baby dragon's cockpit was not open at this time. The 4 of them stumbled on the dragon's back and held onto the side of the cockpit to maintain their balance. Roddy stood steadily, but the Scepter Priestess obviously did not have this kind of experience and was almost blown off by the wind. She gritted her teeth and grabbed onto a fixed rope to maintain her balance. Just as she steadied herself, she heard a hissing sound coming from behind. The Doom Guards and infected beasts above Hovela City obviously could not jump down to chase after them, but more than 10 nightmare knights flew over like a dark cloud in the sky, looking menacing. "Stand still!" Merlin Sarah shouted. After chanting a spell in a low voice, a large red cloud was released. She had slightly modified the high-level spell Hellfire Rain. She condensed the fire element of the elemental plane and turned it into an area of effect magic that hindered the targets in the air. The fiery red cloud quickly floated towards the pursuing Nightmare Knight. The 4 or 5 knights at the front couldn't dodge in time and crashed into the cloud. However, the scene of them being burnt did not happen. They broke through the red cloud unscathed and continued to chase after them. They are protected by the anti-magic field. Merlin Sarah immediately realized that these guys were prepared for the last attack. She frowned and immediately used the power of the elemental plane to release fireballs. However, because she had only mastered it for a short time, she could not immediately release a large area of effect magic. She could only use the most basic spell, Fireball, to lock on and attack. After the 2 Nightmare Knights were hit, these guys immediately shouted and scattered in all directions. The leader blew a whistle, and the knights immediately pulled out the sticks from their waists and stabbed them straight into the backs of their mounts. Nightingale, who originally looked like a bat, immediately roared. Its body emitted intense purple light, and its body expanded like a balloon. Just like Teflon, it underwent a huge change, and its flying speed began to increase greatly. In Roddy's field of vision, the Nightmare's levels had instantly increased by more than 20 levels, and their HP had also started to drop. This was obviously a method of overdrafting their HP. The Nightmare's knights had probably received a death order to prepare to fight to the death. Merlin Sala continued to cast spells, but even with her mental power locked onto the target, the accuracy of her fireballs was greatly reduced due to the enemy's high movement speed. After these guys transformed, they were obviously much faster than the baby shadow dragons. Some of them had even accelerated to the side and were ready to intercept. Nephi was behind Merlin Sala. At this time, she could barely release a shield to protect herself. As a result, a short spear suddenly attacked from the side and directly penetrated the shield, almost hitting her thigh. The short spear slashed the scales on the back of the baby shadow dragon, leaving a deep mark. But under Roddy's command, the baby shadow dragon did not dare to dive or roll. It could only endure the pain and continue to fly at a steady speed. Eudora could not stand steadily at this time. At this time, sitting on the dragon's back, she pulled the rope with her left hand to release the divine spell. She tried her best to chant the spell, but the spell failed several times. Seeing that the monsters were coming, Roddy looked around and immediately shouted, "Merlin Sala, I will count to 3, use the flash spell. 1, 2, 3. Although the anti-magic field could block direct offensive spells such as fireballs, it couldn't block flashes. So, as soon as he said that, Merlina immediately raised her hand and released a large area of effect flash spell. The sudden light made the nightmares who swooped down scream instantly, and their bodies stop. At this time, Roddy activated almost all of his skills and buffs, raised the bow and began to shoot rapidly. Eudora was sitting next to Roddy, and the bow tip was less than half a meter in front of her. The Scepter Priest had just been blinded by the flash spell. When the scenery became clear again, she heard a series of bowstring buzzing in her ears. Eudora did not see the shadow of the arrow at all. At this time, she finally released the divine barrier that she had been chanting for a long time. When she looked up, the nightmares who had accelerated again in front of her seemed to be hit by a heavy blow head-on. 6 of their heads were pierced by the arrow, and they fell directly. The priest was stunned. She turned her head to look at Roddy, but she heard him shout, "Hold on tight." The shadow baby dragon suddenly folded its wings and quickly rolled to the other side twice, avoiding the bite of 2 nightmares. This also made Eudora and Nephi scream in the spin. Before Merlin Sala could fight back, the nightmares behind suddenly spat out a purplish-black breath. Roddy and the others had just regained their balance at this time, and it was too late to resist for a while. They did not expect that the attack full of destructive breath was firmly blocked by Eudora's divine barrier. It seemed that the divine barrier had a natural ability to restrain this kind of attack. The successive waves of breath behind did not shake it at all, and Roddy and Merlin Sala took this opportunity to cooperate with the second flash spell to kill another 3 nightmares. The remaining nightmares were still looking for opportunities to attack, but after the shadow baby dragon continued to fly for another 2 minutes, their original transformation effect completely disappeared. In Roddy's vision, the nightmares' HP dropped to less than 10%, and their pursuit speed was greatly reduced. Finally, they fell to the ground in the distance. There were obviously more than 10 shadows following them from the vicinity of Overlord City. However, when Roddy and the others entered the cockpit and the baby shadow dragon accelerated at full speed, they were completely left in the dust. Merlin Sala released the invisibility barrier, and it did not take long for these nightmares to completely lose them. They had no choice but to return to Overlord City. But in this desert, Roddy did not immediately return to La Sia City. He let the shadow baby dragon land on the ground and told Merlin Sala and the others what he eavesdropped. Then he turned to Eudora, "So I guess that the Tuck clan's monarch is probably controlled by the demon, and that guy is about to come to your capital." Eudora's heart tightened. "Prime Minister, what will happen?" Death, war, and the prelude to the invasion of the entire continent. Roddy knew what kind of monsters would appear in the demonic plane, so he quickly answered, "Icica will become the first base of the demons, and then all the creatures on this continent. After that, it will be the sea, and then the other continent." He did not stop and continued, "So we now have 2 tasks. First, try to reduce the possible losses of Icica. Second, we must take care of Overlord City." Eudora was stunned after hearing this. She really did not expect that Roddy would consider saving the lives of the Tuck clan. After all, until now, weren't they still enemies? Pen Chinese Network. Chapter 1152. Brother Roddy, do we still have to go to Icica to inform them? Nephi understood what he meant. After the demons descended, all living creatures would become the targets of their infection. In other words, if the incarnation of the demon appeared in the most crowded place, it would cause the strength of the demon group to increase rapidly in the early stages. So now I ask you, Eudora, are you willing to accept the task to disperse the people near the Marhala Temple in Distor City? I don't need you to drive everyone out of the city, but the people near the temple should be reduced as much as possible. If you try to disperse the people, then you will save countless Took tribe people. Rhodey spoke very quickly, and Eudora did not say anything after hearing it. She immediately knelt on one knee and said excitedly, "I accept. Marinsura, can you assist her?" Although she said assist, it was actually monitoring. Marinsura was outstanding. It was not difficult for her to get away from that kind of place. If Eudora did not perform the task well, Roddy did not need to say more about what she should do. Thus, after deciding on the plan, Rhodey and the others once again flew on the baby shadow dragon. They first continued to fly south for more than an hour. When they were close to Dinar City, Merlin Sarah directly jumped down from the cockpit with Eudora. Then Roddy took Nephi back and went straight back to Lasya City. At this time, Distor City was still abnormally quiet. At the same time, the news of Eudora's defeat was still spreading on the road. They had not reached the capital yet. Took tribe did not have as advanced a magic circle as Wizard Lockman, so they were obviously at a disadvantage in information transmission. But because of this, Eudora had the advantage of asymmetric information. When Merlin Sarah brought her to glide outside the city and joined the procession that was entering the city of Havilah in the sky had gradually accelerated to its maximum speed. High Priest Windsor stood in front of the temple and looked at the returning Nightmare Knight with a gloomy expression. In the end, she did not speak for a long time. Because she also saw that the enemy was a baby shadow dragon, Windsor was also a little uncertain about the appearance of dragons here. Before this, Took tribe had never come into contact with dragons. There were only eyewitness reports in history, so she did not know what this meant. Even High Priest Windsor doubted whether it was a dragon, because she had never heard of the existence of a dragon that could be ridden by humans. Maybe it was just a certain subspecies? She glanced at the Doom Guards and the infected beasts not far away and said to the guard captain, "All guards continue to patrol. Let them return to their positions, and forbid them from entering the temple area." The guard captain saluted, "Yes, High Priest." Then, she walked into the temple and stood in front of the altar. Looking at the white glow in front of her, she began to recite the scriptures in a low voice. A vigorous divine power was emitted from the stone altar with a diameter of 3 meters. If Rhodey were to stand there, he would find that everything in the temple in front of him was exactly the same as the murals in the ruins of the temple in Duriel. Now the whole city floated in the air with the help of the divine power. When the speed reached a certain level, the spreading anti-magic field began to shrink slowly and finally shrank to the range of the temple. Now the entire city was floating in the air with the help of divine power. When the speed reached a certain level, the anti-magic field that had previously spread out began to slowly shrink, and finally shrunk to within the range of the temple. She silently chanted and tried to calm down her breathing. She stood like this for a few hours, until the sun went to the west at dusk. The priests in the house could not stay in the temple all day. Even at the core magic circle that controlled the whole city, the priests would take turns. Naturally, the priests in the house could not stay in the temple all day long. Even at the core of the magic circle that controlled the entire city, the priests would rotate in batches. A group of priests silently saluted Windsor, and the latter nodded slightly. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. A group of priests silently saluted Windsor, and the latter nodded slightly. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. Under the dusk, a guard who had been standing in the corner of the hall walked straight to her. This was obviously unreasonable. Even if the guard wanted to report something, she could not go directly to the center of the hall. Instead, she had to go to the edge of the hall and kneel down in front of the door to ask for instructions. So the moment Windsor saw her, she realized something was wrong. "Come on, what's the matter?" Windsor takes 2 steps back. The other guards and priests on both sides find something wrong. They all look over. The guard called "Come on" had a very strange expression. She stopped in front of Windsor with a faint smile, and the necklace on her neck suddenly lit up with a more dazzling purple light. "Of course, I'm not surprised by what you have done." That strange voice was definitely not made by the guard in front of her. Windsor just heard it, and then she froze there with cold. She knew very well that this was the voice of the Devil Monarch on the other side of the portal. How did it appear here? Was the plane suppression ineffective? But at this time, she had no time to think more. Windsor immediately ordered, "Kill her! Quick!" At the same time, she had already raised her hand to release a divine spell, because the surrounding divine power was pervading. The speed of the divine spell was almost instantaneous. But the light of the divine spell disappeared directly in front of Come-On. She still had the same expression, stepped forward, and directly knocked away the divine spells released by the other priests. "Tapria's power can't stop me. Your efforts are a joke to me. Reptile, do you think my subordinates came here to protect you?" As she said, there was a sudden loud noise outside the hall. A few seconds later, a guard shouted, "High Priest! Those guys are attacking us! Defend! Don't let them in!" Windsor looked panicked, and her voice trembled. She tried to release the divine spell to attack the guard in front of her, but found that she could not hurt the guard at all. How is it possible? This is the power of the law. The law? No, this is just the suppression brought by the consciousness doppelganger. You are ignorant, but you think you have everything under control. As she spoke, Come-On rushed forward, but she did not attack High Priest Windsor at all. Instead, she pounced on the altar in front of her. Windsor immediately realized that she had been deceived. She wanted to dodge, but she quickly stopped and shouted, "Stop her!" Priest Tawenda, who was closest to her, immediately reached out to stop her. She was extremely fast. She pulled Come-On back, but the latter looked over and raised her hand to push. With a bang, Priest Tawenda's chest was pierced by a purple-black light, and she fell into a pool of blood on the spot, but because of her obstruction, the guards on both sides had already rushed over. At the same time, Windsor directly released the divine power of the altar behind her. Come-On's expression suddenly became ferocious. She frantically reached out to touch the altar, but was desperately pulled away by 4 or 5 guards. Finally, her fingertips missed the altar by a hair's breadth. Mobile version of the fastest updated website. Chapter 1153. The surrounding priests and guards tried their best to drag this guard, who was glowing with purple light, far away. The light from the necklace on the guard's neck gradually dimmed, but there was no sign of anger on his face. She narrowed her eyes, and in the next moment, a curtain of purple light burst out from her body. The surrounding Tuk tribesmen were startled, but they quickly realized that they were unharmed. However, the demons outside the temple instantly became even more terrifying. Their continuous roars made the priests inside the temple feel an unprecedented pressure. There were only 2,000 Tuk tribesmen in the entire Havala city, and half of them were scattered throughout the city. Currently, there were only about 1,000 of them guarding the temple. However, the Doomsday Guards did not care whether they were in formation or not. More than 242-meter-tall elite demons smashed through the Tuk tribesmen guarding the entrance of the temple, and followed behind the 500 infected beasts. After being affected by the purple curtain of light, they collectively entered a berserk state. Their eyes were bloodshot, and their movements were swift. They charged into the temple like a hot knife through butter. Against ordinary humans, they were the most valiant killing machines. Every time they swung their edgeless swords, the Tuk tribesmen in front of them would fall to the ground. Streaks of divine spells landed on their bodies, but were effectively blocked by the black armor on their bodies. It was only at this moment that the priests realized that these fellows had been used to deal with them from the very beginning. Even though the Tuk tribesmen were wearing metal armors, they were like rabbits facing a lion in front of the demons. In a single exchange, they were beaten to a pulp, their bones broken, and their internal organs ruptured. Regardless of whether the soldiers raised their shields or charged forward with all their might, the 3-meter-tall demons quickly fell like harvested crops. Kumon had completely stopped breathing and had fallen to the ground as a corpse. However, Windsor was unable to regain consciousness. Instead, she trembled in fear, because she knew that even if the other party did not touch the altar, these demons that had rushed into the temple could still slaughter everyone here and occupy the city of Havilah. Without the help of Havilah's divine power, Her Majesty Tiria's plan would surely fail. Get the people outside to retreat here. Block the door. Windsor could only hope that the guards who stayed here were brave enough. But as soon as she finished speaking, 7 or 8 Doom guards rushed in from the last door of the inner hall of the temple. They were bathed in blood. There were even corpses of Tuck soldiers hanging on their bodies, and a struggling priest was skewered on their giant swords. Seeing this, the guard captain next to Windsor threw a short spear forward and hit the Doom Guardian's breastplate hard. Clang! The other party's body did not even move, and the short spear only left a shallow mark on the surface of the armor. This fellow casually swung the huge sword, and the priest who was hanging on the sword screamed as he was sent flying, crashing into a group of guards in the hall. Windsor had tried her best to use magic to stop the enemy, but the enemy in front of her seemed to be unaffected and continued to move toward the hall. Looking at all of this, her heart was filled with despair. At this moment, Windsor suddenly found that the remaining light in the hall suddenly disappeared. She thought that those nightmares were flying and blocking the afterglow of the setting sun, but when she looked up, she was suddenly stunned. Because through the narrow window, Windsor saw a pair of huge wings flying past, and at the same time, a strange noise came. That is, boom! Suddenly there was a loud, muffled sound outside the temple, followed by a series of deafening dragon roars. Everyone in the room was completely stunned, because they had never heard such a sound. But the coercion from the top creatures made everyone in the room tremble. The demon army began to be chaotic. The Doom guards who had rushed to the door hesitated for a moment, but immediately rushed toward Windsor's position. Obviously, they knew what their ultimate goal was. The leading Doom guard raised the giant sword in his hand and aimed at the altar. However, it just took 2 steps, and then it staggered and knelt on the ground. Only then did the Tuck clansmen in the hall discover that the Achilles tendon of the Doom guard's hind legs were pierced by 2 arrows. Its armor protected the front, but the horseshoe-like reverse joints were exposed, so the arrows directly pierced through its flesh and stuck in the middle of the bone. At this time, the Doom guard's whole body was emitting violent demon plane fluctuations. Its muscles were even stronger than ordinary armor, but the joints of its thighs were not protected by muscles and armor. When the Doom guard found that it could not move, it had to reach out to pull out the arrows. The injury was recovering quickly, but before it could stand up, its neck was shot by arrows one after another. The Doom guard's armor was not a metal can that could protect it from all directions. In order to ensure flexibility, there was no armor on the back of its neck. Therefore, it roared, but it did not fall to the ground. Instead, it stretched out its hand to pull out the arrows. But before it could move, the Tuck clansmen next to it had seized the opportunity and chopped its neck with their swords, cutting off its head. In the thick smell of blood, Windsor looked up at the figure standing on the edge of the top of the temple, but she could not guess the intention of the other party, nor did she understand why this guy wanted to help her. However, when he turned his gaze to the front again, the demons that were originally aggressive were actually screaming and running away. Outside the temple, screams came from afar. The corpses of the infected beasts kept flying, like tomatoes being thrown out casually, and were thrown to the wall by the great force. Their internal organs were broken, and blood spurted out from their mouth. Their bodies smashed the stone wall that was hundreds of years old, and cracks appeared on it. The tall Doom guard waved its giant sword, and then its body was torn into pieces. The pieces of flesh fell on the temple, and the screams gradually disappeared. After that, Windsor finally saw the true faces of the figures that walked in. 6 tall, handsome men and beautiful women slowly walked into the temple. They looked arrogant, had dragon horns on their heads, and were dressed in luxurious clothes. After jumping down from the roof, Roddy stepped on the blood of the Doom Guards, nodded, and saluted the young dragons in front of him. "Thank you for your help." When the dragons faced him, they restrained some of their arrogance. At the same time, countless airborne soldiers landed around the temple. Erwin led an elite team and landed on the roof of the temple. They held crossbows and entered the temple through the huge stone window. Then, they stood behind Roddy and waited for orders. At this time, Roddy had no time to say anything else because in the mission panel, in front of him, the origin of the artifact mission had been updated. Mobile version of the fastest updated website. Chapter 1154. The original Marhala Temple retained the power of the gods, and Tapri still protects his believers. Tapri is still protecting his believers. Look for clues to the altar and try to repair Tapri's scepter. Mission objective: repair the damaged Viper's Kiss, incomplete. Mission reward: 32,800 EXP. Tapria's blessing. Such a mission reward was enough to make anyone go crazy with excitement. After all, the blessing of a god was definitely not something an ordinary buff could compare to. But Roddy only read the first half of the mission and quickly raised his head. He quickly said to Erwin, the paratrooper behind him, "Go and contact Natha." "Yes, Prime Minister." Teflon, who was next to Erwin, quickly stepped on the colorful blood on the ground and rushed out. Roddy looked at the dragons and said, "This is our first time working together overseas. You have defeated the troops from the demonic plane and seen through the demon monarch's plot. I will tell these things truthfully to the feudal lords." Compared to the polite greetings between human nobles, Roddy's words were very straightforward, and the dragons obviously preferred this kind of straightforward words. They all smiled and nodded reservedly. Among the 6, 3 were red dragons, and the remaining 1 was black dragon Hurlo and 2 crystal dragons. They were the young dragons who were stationed near Lesamon. After the news about the demons reached the kingdom of Karen, these members directly came to Lesamon City and became the temporary high-end combat force. And among them, the leader was a mature-looking, bearded red dragon some more. He had specially listened to Kardashian's lessons at the Magic Tower in Hollier City, so he did not dare to underestimate Roddy's position. He immediately replied, "Prime Minister Roddy is too polite. All this is what we should do. However, now that the demons are dead, the follow-up: if it's possible, everyone should rest for a while. The situation in Isika is not very optimistic. I need to ask carefully before I can make more judgments." Of course. Sumer discussed with his fellow tribesmen. Some of them went outside to keep watch, some took turns to rest, and some stayed nearby to observe. Roddy ignored them and walked towards High Priest Windsor. Windsor was looking at the corpse of a priest beside her in a daze. Her expression was one of despair. "High Priest Windsor, can you tell me something about the altar?" Windsor turned her head and shook her head. "It's too late, it's too late." No matter how Roddy asked, she looked as if she had lost her soul. Roddy was anxious. He grabbed her collar and pulled her up from the ground. "Do you know anything about the Viper's Kiss?" Hearing the words, Viper's Kiss, Windsor's eyes moved back to Roddy's face. Until now, she still didn't know where Roddy came from. She could only confirm that this guy should be related to the shadow dragon that escaped before. However, she could never have imagined that the dragons would intervene and even personally enter the temple to kill the devils. "You are from Lochman?" "I come from the kingdom of Karen on the other side of the sea. I'm here to pull you out of the abyss." Roddy was too lazy to deal with her now. He shouted, "Answer my question. Do you know anything about the Viper's Kiss?" "My lord's scepter, the proof of God's existence in the world, It was born in the original Marhala temple, yes. So, this is the place where the scepter was born, right? Rhodey remembered the scene in Lassiman's temple. He had already confirmed that this was the birthplace of the artifact. Windsor's answer further proved this point. This place is called the Scepter Altar. What on earth are you? Before she finished her words, Natha had already rushed in from outside with Sally on her back. The wood elf was thin, but her strength was far beyond that of ordinary people. At this time, she directly came in front of Roddy and gently put Sally down. Sally seemed to sense something. At this time, although her face was pale, she gritted her teeth and stood still. Sally held the gray viper's kiss scepter in her hand. She raised her head and looked forward. The simple square stone altar was now emitting violent waves of divine power. Sally could feel the familiar breath. She now understood that Theseus, Rose Cross, and Viper Cross were actually religions of the same origin. At this time, she was facing the breath of this god. Roddy, what should I do? I don't know. Should I put the scepter on it? Roddy had already let go of Windsor's collar. He came to Sally's side and helped her to the side of the altar. Only then did he find that there was a rough engraving on the top of the altar. It was the image of 3 vipers, and at the center where the 3 snakes intertwined and converged, there was a slightly concave ring. Sally already knew what she should do. She could feel a strange attraction, so she directly walked up to the vast divine power. Windsor, who was next to her, looked at the scepter in her hand with her eyes wide open. Could this be, buzz? Suddenly there was a buzzing sound from the altar. Sally took a deep breath and slowly raised the scepter in her hand. Boundless divine power swept out. She let go of her hand, staggered a step, and let the scepter be wrapped by this power and fly to the center of the altar. Roddy looked around and the 2 dragons present nodded at him. The paratroopers had already escorted the priests and guards who had not been injured before out of the hall. At the moment it was absolutely safe here. Turning his eyes back to the task column, Roddy suddenly saw that the description of the origin of artifacts had changed. Task objective: repair the damaged Viper's Kiss. Repairing. That's it! He shouted. The divine power is repairing it. Sally, it's working. This is really the Viper's Kiss. Windsor didn't know what to say anymore. She opened her mouth slightly and looked at the sickly Sally, and then looked at Roddy, who ran over to support her. At this moment, she felt that her thoughts were somewhat stagnant. The vast divine power wrapped the scepter, and the figures of the 3 vipers slowly appeared on the top of the scepter. As time went by, they gradually became clearer. Sally's face was flushed, and she was extremely excited, because she knew that this meant that she didn't have to face the impending death. She held Roddy's hand tightly and wanted to say something, but her expression suddenly froze. Crack! The cracking sound made Roddy's heart skip a beat. He quickly looked at the scepter and found that there was a long crack on the surface of the scepter. Realizing that something was wrong, Sally quickly reached out to take it. As a result, at this moment, the whole scepter completely shattered in front of the 2 with a "pa" sound. Countless fragments didn't splatter in all directions. Instead, they dissipated in the air like dust. Sally's fingers passed through them, and she instinctively scooped them up, only to discover that she couldn't even grab a single speck of dust. How? Roddy's heart was cold. He didn't expect such a result at all. Didn't the task prompt repairing? Why is this happening? But before he could check the task progress, Sally beside him had already slowly fallen to the side. End of this chapter. Chapter 1155. Sally. Roddy hurriedly held her, only to find that the monarch's lips were pale, and her HP had fallen to the dangerous line of 4%. Below 5%, people would enter a state of near death. Even if Sally was not cursed, her HP would continue to drop. Roddy's forehead was full of cold sweat because he really did not know what to do at this time. Turning his head and looking around, Roddy instinctively shouted, "Healing potion? Who has healing potion?" Natha quickly reached out and handed it over. Roddy's hands were shaking when he fed the potion to Sally, but the latter had lost consciousness and fell into a coma. The potion accidentally spilled on her chest. Roddy was afraid that if he continued to pour it down, he would choke on it, so he quickly stopped. At this time, he saw the High Priest Windsor, who had been silent. He immediately asked, "Your divine incantation can heal, right?" Windsor couldn't even speak at this time because her mind was always filled with the broken picture of the Viper's Kiss. The cult artifact suddenly appeared and then shattered and destroyed in front of her. She was really stunned. Roddy asked again, and she reacted. Then she instinctively asked, "Is she the holder of the scepter?" But as soon as she finished speaking, she saw Roddy's almost murderous expression. Windsor shivered. Without waiting for any answer, she quickly raised her hand and released the divine incantation. The almost instantaneous white light fell on Sally's body. Perhaps because the divine power was too vast, the healing effect was excellent at this time. It actually made her HP that had fallen to 3% recover a little. Roddy finally breathed a sigh of relief, but he immediately realized that this was a temporary solution. He immediately said to Natha, "Go and call a few more priests over." He turned his eyes to the taskbar and found that the origin of the artifact. Mission had changed. Mission objective: repair the damaged Viper's Kiss, incomplete. This description made Roddy stunned because he thought he would see the words "failed," but he did not expect it to be the initial "incomplete." If the Earthbreaker mission showed "failed," the words in the entire taskbar would turn gray and automatically disappear after a period of time. But now it showed normal, which meant that he still had a chance to continue to complete the mission. Roddy's originally depressed face became excited again, but the mission did not give any more hints. He did not know where to look for clues for a while. Sally, who was breathing weakly, tilted her neck to one side. Roddy quickly helped her lean against the altar, thinking that he could let her body stretch a little. As soon as he touched the altar, the prompt in the taskbar suddenly changed. The words "incomplete" changed to "repairing." But soon it flashed and changed back. Roddy suddenly realized the problem. The Viper's Kiss scepter itself could choose its owner. As the holder, Sally could even turn the 3 vipers into tattoos on her body. This probably meant that she was also a part of the Viper's Kiss. Sally had become the carrier of the divine power, or even she was the scepter itself. He turned his eyes to the surface of the altar, only to find that after the scepter was shattered, the 3 snake-shaped patterns on the altar became brighter than before. Roddy did not hesitate to pick up Sally and gently put her on the altar. A pale white light lingered around Sally. This visible abnormality, and the prompt in the taskbar, made Roddy confirm that he did not do anything wrong. But as soon as she lay on the altar, everyone experienced a violent sense of weightlessness. At the same time, the task description also changed. Repairing the scepter requires a lot of divine power. Repairing it now may lead to unpredictable consequences. Stop, or the city will directly crash. Windsor had probably realized the identity of Sally at this time and shouted, "If she is the incarnation of Andapriest, then the divine power of this temple alone is not enough. The power of Tapri is distributed in the 2 Marhala temples. Except for the original temple, the rest of the divine power is basically gathered in the King's City temple, but what? But if you want to link the power of the 2 temples together, you must go through a ritual, then carry out the ritual." Roddy had no other choice now. But Windsor slowly shook her head and looked at Priest Tawenda, who was killed by Come On. There must be 3 selected death messengers to complete this ritual, but now, obviously, one of the 3 messengers died, and the ritual would definitely not be completed. What messengers? Roddy instinctively asked. When Windsor repeated, "The origin of the artifact," Mission description had been completely updated. He carried Sally down from the altar. After the whole city stabilized, he directly said to Windsor, "While your Majesty has not gone crazy, I hope you can move the city of Hovilla to the city of Dister as soon as possible. This may be the only chance to save the Thuk tribe. Can you do it?" Windsor knew that she had no choice now, and what Roddy wanted to do did not seem to conflict with what she originally wanted to do. She wanted to agree, but she asked, "But the ritual? I will solve the matter of the death messengers." Roddy turned to look at Natha, exhaled, and said in a low voice, "Go get Akasha." At the same time, the capital of Isika, Dister City, had just become lively. This was the most prosperous city in the whole of Isika. All the population and resources of the desert country were basically close to water sources. Dister City was the same. This was the largest oasis in the southern desert. There were even 4 green lakes in the city, and there was also a 7 to 8 meters wide river passing through the center of the city. The city was thus divided into the larger northern outer city area and the southern temple area. The temple area not only had the palace and the temple, but it was also the residence of several large families of the Thuk tribe. The entire city area was surrounded by a moat dug along the river, but since it was built, there had not been any war, so there were countless streets and intricate stone buildings outside the moat. Smoke was rising from the chimneys, and villages were scattered all over Dijar. The entire city had evolved from a fortress city into a large and densely populated comprehensive city. The total population was probably more than 200,000. Although it was not comparable to Duriel City, it was still the largest settlement of the Thuk tribe. And Eudora, who knew this, was actually more anxious than anyone else. She knew very well that if Her Majesty Turiya really let the demons come, the fate of these hundreds of thousands of people would completely fall into the hands of the demons. At this time, the 2 people on the streets of the outer city area were not eye-catching at all. Although the sky had just turned dark, under the lit torches everywhere, the busiest street in the central area was still full of people. Gorgeous carriages pulled by camels were surrounded by strong and handsome male guards. The people on the streets were all women, and the men were like accessories. Marinsara had read about the history of the Thuk tribe before, but when she was a dragon, she only sneered at the Thuk tribe. But now that she was here as a human, Marinsara was actually interested, because these Thuk tribe women were very bold in their gazes and behavior, and many people were staring at her. Fortunately, she knew that the task was more important, so she asked, "What are you going to do?" Chapter 1156. The family's encampment is outside the temple area. I have to go back to take control. Of course, Eudora was not a mediocre person. She had already thought about the general action steps on the way here. This scepter priest was certainly not a great clergyman who wanted to save the country and the people. The first thing she considered was how to ensure that she would not become a victim. The second was to make profits for herself and her family in the chaos. This was the main reason why she dared to stand out and take the great risk to return to Dister City at this time. If high risk could not bring high profit, Eudora would not stand out when she was in Lasya City. But Marinsara did not care how she thought. She pointed to the street and said, "Then let's go. I will go back with you. Will anyone stop you? I have a way." As Eudora spoke, she came to a carriage shop and showed the signet ring of her scepter priestess. The status of a scepter priestess in Esika was very high, so the people in the carriage shop didn't dare to ask any questions. They immediately arranged the most luxurious carriage for her and Merlin Sarah to go to the temple area. When entering the temple area, Eudora frowned. Marinsara looked around and asked, "Is there a problem?" The number of patrolling soldiers is less. The atmosphere is not right. Eudora guessed. After the carriage passed the inspection and arrived at the family encampment, Eudora got out of the carriage and found that the courtyard of her family was also lacking a lot of guards. "Madam," the remaining 2 soldiers at the door were very surprised to see her and immediately saluted. Eudora did not even nod her head and walked straight in. Marinsura followed her in, but the guards did not even dare to ask more questions. Obviously, Eudora had a very high status in the family. But when she walked into the main hall of the stone house and asked about the location of several elders and other priests, she found the problem. "What do you mean? Taking the family guards to the palace?" Eudora knew something was wrong. She asked loudly, "How many people? Are there people from other families going?" "Madam, all the families have received the order. Now the masters and elite troops of each family are waiting outside the palace. This is the request of Her Majesty Teria." Eudora was the second in command of the Lauchi family. The first in command was her mother, the matriarch of the entire family, Asador. She was also one of the 12 officiants of the kingdom. The pinnacle of the entire kingdom was Talia, who had been bestowed with divine authority. Talia's most trusted high priest, Windsor, was actually also one of the 12 officiants. However, because he was the emperor's trusted aide, his position was firmly higher than the priests of the other families. Therefore, he was known as the only high priest. The other 11 came from the 4 major families and the other 3 second-tier families. Evelyn and Doris, who were now working hard in the kingdom of Karen, had 2 families behind them that had 6 seats at the level of the 12 officiants in Isika. Although, scepter priest, Eudora was the general who led the army to war, she did not have any soldiers now. Her identity as a commander was not a deterrent to the family. The real direct subordinates of Eudora were all prisoners in Rasia City. Therefore, she frowned for a moment. After thinking for a few seconds, she asked the butler to call the other power holders in the family. In the Thuk family, the fathers of the children in the family were different. At the same time, there was a competitive relationship between them. Therefore, after a few minutes, the 3 people who appeared in the room all showed a suspicious attitude towards Eudora. The older woman who looked similar to Eudora was called Kuna. She crossed her arms and questioned, "Eudora, aren't you supposed to be in the front line of Rasia City? Why did you suddenly appear here? Did you lose the battle?" "Something happened in the front line. I must inform all the people in the city immediately. Otherwise, the people of the entire Distar city will suffer." Eudora and Kuna didn't get along very well because her position of scepter priest was squeezed out of Kuna. But she didn't have time to be tit for tat. "I need all the available people in the family to spread some news, otherwise." Kuna didn't say anything. "Who do you think will listen to you here? Eudora, don't show off your prestige as a scepter priest at home, Puff." Before Kuna finished her words, her neck was directly pierced by Marinsura's ice spear. Kuna still had a sneer on her face, but there was a huge bloody hole on her neck. Blood splashed out, and Eudora's body was stained with a lot of bright red marks. Seeing her half-sister was killed, she was shocked for a moment, but from the beginning to the end, she didn't feel pity or regret. She even felt a little happy. Kuna fell to the ground with her hands clasped around her neck. She convulsed a few times before passing away. The other 2 girls stared at Merlinsara in horror. They were just about to yell at her when Merlinsara pointed a finger at them. Eudora was one step ahead and asked, "Do you need me to repeat what I just said?" They looked at each other and finally chose to give in. "Okay, then from now on, listen to me. Gather all the people in the family that can be used, no matter if they are slaves or kitchen maids, gather them all. We have to notify the people in the city in order." After obtaining the authority of command with an iron fist, Eudora quickly arranged the order. At this moment, all the hard work and guards of the Lauchi family were mobilized by her. In less than 10 minutes, the carriages pulled by camels quickly headed towards the outskirts of the city. Eudora personally led a small team out of the temple area. Marinsura didn't continue to follow Eudora. Instead, she flew to the road outside of Dister City in the dark. Not only did she plan to evacuate the people in the city, but she also planned to intercept the magic crystal that was prepared to be transported to the Imperial City. She wanted to fundamentally stop the possibility of Talia activating the ritual. However, when she found the caravan in the dark, she found a large group of Nightmare Knights directly carrying the heavily guarded magic crystal with cloth bags and flying towards the Imperial Palace. It was obvious that the monarch couldn't wait any longer. He even directly ordered the Nightmare Knights to speed up the transportation. Marinsura was currently about 20 kilometers away from the city. She knew that if she didn't stop them, it would be too late for Roddy to reach here. Thus, she immediately chose to attack. The sudden fireball that flew across the night sky suddenly killed 3 Nightmare Knights in a sneak attack. It also caused the magic crystal that they were carrying to explode in the air. But after that, Marinsura didn't say anything and immediately fled because a large number of Nightmare Knights and magic eyes suddenly flew out of the entire Dister City. She knew that no matter how strong her magic was, it was impossible for her to fight against an organized army. She immediately fled and quickly used magic to return to Dister City. Chapter 1157. At this time, in the outer city of Dister, the convoy of the Lauchi family did not start to spread the news directly. Instead, they went to the streets of the outermost area of the city and began to shout loudly. Priest Eudora was defeated by the enemy's soldiers who fell from the sky. Defeat at the front line. Defeat at the front line. The enemy can fly. They are about to land in Dister City. Run. The enemy is about to land from the sky. When such words and comments appeared, the people who were about to rest or drink in the bar were stunned. Then, they burst into laughter. Did you eat too much? Landing from the sky? Can the sorcerers of Lassiman fly? Priest Eudora is not a child. She has never lost a battle. Next time, make up a more suitable reason. A group of women sat around the bar and laughed at the person who passed the news. However, the person did not explain at all. Instead, he continued to shout, Priest Eudora has returned to Dister City during the chaos. She risked her life to pass the news to everyone so that everyone will believe that she is not lying. The women in the bar were stunned. The male waiter who was holding the drinks and wearing revealing clothes stopped. Everyone looked over. Priest Eudora is back? As they were talking, there was the sound of camels' hurried footsteps and shouting, Scepter Priest Eudora is here. I order you to escape immediately. Leave Dister City. I order you. The sound came from afar. The people who were closer to the entrance of the bar quickly got up to take a look. They saw an open carriage in front of them with an oil lamp hanging on it. A figure wearing a priest robe and holding a scepter flashed in front of them. Is it her? Is it really Eudora? The person who was asked did not see clearly. After all, there were not many ways for people in the outer city to know Eudora. They could only see her from afar during the ceremony. However, thinking that the priest robe and scepter that the other party was wearing could not be fake, she still replied, It seems to be true. I saw her scepter and priest robe. No one dares to fake their identity. It's true? There was an uproar in the bar, and the guard who informed the news shouted a few more times. Finally, someone chose to believe the news and ran out. Her behavior was like a spark that instantly ignited the fear in most people's hearts. No matter where humans went, there were always blind followers. Once the first person ran out of the bar, the second, the third, and almost everyone started to run away with the appearance of Eudora. Such a scene quickly appeared on the streets outside the city. When her carriage traveled back and forth for 6 kilometers, the city in the dark had begun to be brightly lit. There were even scenes of buildings burning. Obviously, when chaos appeared, there would always be people who would take advantage of the situation. But this was actually what Eudora wanted to see. because chaos in the city meant that Her Majesty Tyria had to send people to stop and maintain order. This would definitely cause the army gathered around the temple to disperse, thus reducing the probability of being infected or even attacked by the demons. She deliberately chose to spread the news from the outskirts of the city because there were only 12 gates in the outskirts of the city. If more than 100,000 people rushed out at the same time, they would definitely be blocked. Therefore, Eudora would rather let the evacuation time be extended than to see such a scene. These people from the Lochy family constantly spread the news to the city. In fact, when there was chaos and fire in the city, the people in the inner city had already been awakened and gradually joined the escape team. Even if a rumor was repeated 10,000 times, it could become the truth. Even if the news of "the enemy is about to descend from the sky and attack Distor City" sounded extremely absurd, seeing the scene of countless people running away, the entire Distor City still chose to believe it and join the escape team. The city defense army in the outskirts was actually the papal army led by the priest with the altar as the unit. At this time, they were basically transferred to the outskirts of the temple area. The number of papal army left here was only 1/3 of the usual number. Therefore, in the face of such chaos, they were unable to stop it at all. Some of them were even injured by the criminals who took advantage of the chaos. The chaos began to spread. Eudora herself did not expect everything to go so smoothly because the original defense mechanism of the city was almost paralyzed. Now, if someone really attacked, these people in the outskirts would probably not be able to escape. She looked in the direction of the palace, not knowing what her mother and Her Majesty Tyria were doing at this time. In fact, at this time, the news had already spread to the temple area and caused a shock among all the families and priests. One had to know that because of the sacredness of the Marhala temple, there had never been an army like the royal guards. Only the high priest guards could walk in the temple. The armies of other priests and families were not allowed to appear near the temple. This was naturally considered for the stability of the imperial power. But now, nearly 20,000 private soldiers of various families were suddenly gathered, and even half of the papal army in Distor City was transferred. The priests present were all confused, but they did not say anything due to the authority of Her Majesty. In addition, the political environment of Iska was still considered stable, so no one had any other thoughts. And inside the palace, Her Majesty Tyria's face was gloomy because of the attack on the Nightmare Night. However, she did not fly into a rage and execute the person in charge. Instead, she ordered in a low voice, "Just put all the transported magic crystal downstairs. Let all the priests in." "Yes, Your Majesty." A few seconds later, a message came, "Your Majesty, there is chaos in the outer city. The priests are asking if we need to send soldiers to maintain order, because some places are burning." Tyria's back was facing the priest who was speaking. She seemed to want to say something, but after a purple light flashed in her eyes, her hands trembled slightly. Then, she calmed down and replied with a voice as calm as an ancient well, "Reject their request. Let them follow me to the first underground floor." After a pause, she emphasized, "Now, immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." When the main hall was empty, she began to breathe heavily, as if she had been enduring some kind of discomfort. Tyria looked down at her hands. Countless cracks had appeared on her skin, and they were emitting a faint purple light. "Why is it like this? Why?" The young monarch's voice was filled with panic. She timidly took a few steps back, but soon her body froze. Her face that had just shed tears because of fear suddenly became cold. "From the beginning, you should have thought of this result, shouldn't you?" The one who spoke now did not seem to be the king of the Thuk clan. End of this chapter. Chapter 1158. Run. The enemy is coming. Where is the enemy? In the sky. In the sky, look. These dark clouds. Damn it, the enemy is going to land in the city soon. It had been 6 hours since Eudora spread the news. Although it was midnight, people were still screaming in panic. Marinsura lowered her head and walked in the shadows of the houses. She had achieved her goal, so she didn't care about Eudora anymore. All she wanted to do was to get closer to the temple district and observe the enemy's movements. According to the plan, Her Majesty Turiya would only start the ceremony at noon tomorrow, so Marinsura planned to find a place to hide at the edge of the temple district. The outer city had been in chaos for more than 4 hours. Tens of thousands of people in the city chose to leave, but most of them were reluctant to part with their belongings. They carried their bags and ran out, causing a traffic jam. As a result, the men and women in ragged clothes took the opportunity to steal, and some even killed people on the street. Bloody conflicts broke out continuously, and the burning fires began to spread. The city without the control of the army was only slightly chaotic at first, but after a long period of no one intervened, it had now turned into a full-blown riot. Some mobs even thought that there was a problem in the temple district, so they gathered and tried to attack the city walls of the inner city. As expected, a large number of them were killed by the city guards, and some of them had already left. Marinsura stood beside the river that separated the temple district from the outer city, and she realized that something was wrong. Because she was 7 or 8 meters away from the river, Marinsura could see that many soldiers were not allowed to leave their posts by sergeants, and there were corpses under the city gates leading to the temple district. Many low-level clergymen were crying and asking them to maintain order, but they only received silence in return. She frowned and stared, feeling more and more uneasy. Not long after, Marinsura finally decided to leave, because there were already groups of nightmares hovering in the sky. They were flying back and forth above the temple, as if they were guarding something. When she looked over, Marinsura realized that there were large patches of dark clouds around her, and the wind was howling, blowing gravel all over her mouth. It obviously didn't rain often in Dar City. Marinsura quickened her pace, and just as she was about to reach the edge of the outskirts of the city, a red light suddenly lit up behind her, allowing her to clearly see her own shadow. Marinsura turned around abruptly, only to discover that the light wasn't coming from inside the temple. Instead, it was coming from a huge meteorite falling from the sky. The Great Meteorite spell wasn't a forbidden spell that an ordinary magus could cast. The meteorite falling from the sky had a diameter of more than 20 meters. With one glance, Marinsura realized that the caster behind it was one of the top few in this world. The people who were looting and burning were all stunned by this scene. Before they could react, the meteorite had already pierced through the clouds and landed in the center of the temple area. Boom! Everyone in the outer city had never seen such a spell array before. They stood there like silly geese, staring blankly at the light blooming. Marinsura narrowed her eyes. She clearly saw that before the meteorite touched the ground, it was completely blocked by some kind of power. However, the impact of the explosion contained an unimaginable fire elemental rhythm. This wasn't a simple meteorite falling, but a powerful attack from a demigod red dragon. After realizing this, even though she was 2 to 3 kilometers away from the explosion, she gritted her teeth and quickly ran behind a low wall. She used a spell to dig a hole in the ground and jumped in. At the same time, she cast a reinforcement spell on the low wall, a flame defense barrier around her, and an air compression spell 3 times in the area she was at. In the next instant, the flames engulfed everything like a wave. The people in the outskirts didn't have time to dodge and immediately let out miserable screams. Even though they were 2 kilometers away from the explosion, ordinary people were instantly ignited by the high temperature of the flames. Their clothes, flesh, and fat were all burned at the same time. At a glance, they almost looked like human candles that were struggling. Marinsura, on the other hand, used the low wall and the shield to block the roaring flames. Many people hiding in the surrounding buildings were clearly not ignited, but because of the temporary lack of oxygen, a large number of them passed out from suffocation. But the air compression spell, that was released in advance, saved enough oxygen for Merlin Sarah. After more than 10 seconds, Merlin Sarah looked out and immediately realized that the large meteorite spell seemed to be just the beginning of a forbidden spell attack. Then a series of colorful lights and waves broke out, proving that the 5 dragons had sent at least a senior elder or above to participate in the casting of the spell. The falling icicles, octagonal light pillars, vines and storms that stretched out from all directions, and the nightmares that were instantly killed, all announced a fact. The number of dragons that came here tonight was more than 100. They should have collectively hidden in the floating clouds beforehand. At this time, with the light of the spell, Merlin Sarah could see countless figures that were reflected above the clouds. She felt an inexplicable shudder. This was not because of the psychological trauma brought by the dragon's pursuit, but because of the decision of the dragons in front of her. Judging from their posture, they were probably aiming to flatten the temple area from the very beginning. At the same time, because the power of the spell was too great, even the outskirts and nearby villages were inevitably caused huge casualties. If Eudora hadn't evacuated half of the city's population 4 or 5 hours in advance, perhaps the number of casualties after this wave of forbidden spell attack would be more than 50,000. In other words, in the eyes of the dragons, humans were not worth mentioning at all. If they died, they died. As long as they could achieve their goal, they didn't care how many such ants died. Intense explosions kept ringing in the air. Merlin Sarah realized that there was more than one round of forbidden spells. After a short pause, the second round of forbidden spells began. She looked up and saw that the clouds had already dispersed, revealing the figures of the 5 dragon lords. Merlin Sarah didn't know the relationship between Roddy and the dragons before, but now she finally realized that this once inconspicuous little dragon lord actually sent a message and summoned almost all the dragons and their lords. The surviving people in the outskirts of the city, as well as Eudora who had just been blown to the ground covered in dirt, all looked up at the shining temple area and the countless giant dragons. Mobile version of the fastest updated website. Chapter 1159. The people around Eudora were speechless. Many people who had just escaped from the city even shouted meaninglessly because of fear. In the face of such a scene that was more terrible than a natural disaster, people often collapsed emotionally and completely gave up resistance. But Eudora shouted to people to speed up their pace and escape into the distance. She had jumped off the carriage and illuminated the surroundings with the scepter, so that people running in the dark could find the coordinate. The family guards and other members who had followed her all looked at her with a different look at this time, because they realized that Eudora did not lie. If they were still in the temple area, they would have been blown into ashes. The sisters who were still unconvinced of Eudora were all obedient and didn't speak. Those ordinary people not far away were even shouting Eudora's name at this time. Unconsciously, Scepter Priest Eudora had become the savior of the entire city. Those who were skeptical about the enemy attack heard the explosion in the distance and saw the scene of destruction. They worshipped Eudora for a while. Some devout believers even knelt down in the direction of her and shouted, "Thank you for the blessing of the true God. Thank you, Your Excellency Priest." Eudora was caught off guard by such a series of shouts. She originally planned to leave when most of the people escaped, but at this time she heard people shouting her name around her. She felt a little embarrassed. In desperation, she had to call the nearby servants and tried to organize a team to rescue the injured who were affected by the spell. Eudora's divine power was strong enough. She quickly healed and saved a large number of injured people with divine power. When this behavior was repeated many times, Eudora gradually lost the idea of escaping. Sweat soaked her robe. Because she kept releasing divine power, her face was abnormally pale. But looking at the civilians covered in blood recovering under the divine power, Eudora had an inexplicable emotion inexplicably. She began to use her ability to arrange troops to rescue the injured. She quickly let her subordinates incorporate those young and strong people. She established a temporary organization and started to search and rescue according to the street area. She even temporarily found materials to build fences near the villages in the outer city to prevent rioting people from attacking the newly established rescue camp. She didn't realize what the result would be. But in the face of this disaster that almost destroyed the entire city, Eudora could only do so much. After treating another injured person, the sudden vibration from the ground made Eudora stop. She found that the bombardment of the dragons in the distance seemed to have finally stopped. Is it over? Eudora narrowed her eyes and looked at the temple area where the light dimmed. She was almost sure that all the buildings there had probably been razed to the ground. However, after a few seconds, the dragon roars suddenly became sharper. The Marhala Divine Temple suddenly released a purple beam of light into the sky. A large number of dragons in the sky, who could not dodge in time, were struck by the beam of light and fell to the ground uncontrollably. Then, in the light, countless figures flew up from the bottom. Even though Eudora was so far away, she could see the size of the bat-winged monsters. They were comparable to the flying dragons around. The dragons hovering in the sky immediately fought with the black shadows that flew out. But this time, Eudora found that the dragons didn't release any magic at all. She watched for a few seconds and realized that there should be an anti-magic field there, so these dragons could only fight with those monsters face to face. This scene showed a terrifying fact. The enemy might not have been eliminated at all. But at such a distance, Eudora didn't know what the situation in the temple area was. She could only give orders loudly and let the team try to rescue as many innocent people as possible. Looking up at the sky, Eudora didn't know when the city of Hovilla would appear above her head. She didn't even know if Roddy and the others coming here would be of any help to the battle. Because the few largest dragons in the distance had already rushed straight towards the light of the temple. At this time, the temple of Marhala wasn't destroyed. On the contrary, because of the existence of a solid boundary, the indiscriminate bombardment of the dragons just now had only razed the buildings at the edge of the temple area to the ground. It didn't cause much damage to the temple and the 20,000 troops that had gathered in the vicinity. This wasn't because the boundary of the temple was strong, but because there was a sudden anti-magic field here, which reduced the power of most of the magic released by the dragons by more than 90%. For the 5 lords of the dragons, the anti-magic field was also an obstacle that they couldn't overcome. Even if their strength could be called demigod, but under the interference of the real divine power of Tapri, these powerful existences still couldn't release the elemental magic of their own dimension. Although the lords were skilled and had also mastered the ability to use the elements of other dimensions, in a battle of this level, releasing magic that wasn't proficient in was often a waste of effort. In the situation where the bombardment of magic didn't work, they found that the enemy had actually completely transformed the Tuk tribe priests inside the temple with the power of the devil. The officiant, scepter priests, and guards instantly turned into powerful monsters with purple light all over their bodies. This time, they weren't like the one-time demons outside Arasia city. Instead, they were personally infused with the power of the demon lord Kasvara, truly becoming a terrifying existence that was a mixture of divine power and demon power. At this time, among the monsters that flew out of the temple, the Tuk tribe transformed into monsters with black carapace all over their bodies. Their defense was amazing. They even had 2 pairs of wings on their back. Be it speed or agility in the air, they were far superior to the ordinary dragons that couldn't cast spells. In a single move, they were actually on par with Arlwa, a core force that had been through hundreds of battles. The most terrifying thing was that the spherical portal beneath the temple had appeared in the center of the temple, and its size had expanded by several times. The figures that kept rushing out from it were the familiar demonic army, and among them, there was no lack of terrifying presences that weren't inferior to the dragons. The dragons had no other choice. They attacked from afar and realized that the effect was minimal. If they didn't take action, the demonic army would quickly form. Hence, they could only take the risk and charge into the barrier, intending to forcefully close the portal. However, after entering the temple, the 5 lords and the 20+ elders who had rushed in together realized that Talia, who was standing in the center of the temple, was no longer maintaining her human form. Her eyes flickered with purple light, and the magic patterns on her shoulders, waist, and arms also lit up. Her long hair fluttered due to the vast undulations of power. She looked at the dragons that broke through the barrier, smashed through the roof of the temple, and landed in the hall. However, she looked at them with a calm expression. The era that belongs to you has ended. Hearing this voice, the Ice Dragon Lord Victor narrowed his eyes. Kuzvara. So you've already descended? End of this chapter. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.